Chapter 9. When Death Comes Knocking. Rasengan. Chidori. Rearing back, Sasuke drove his black lightning-encrusted fist forward, aiming at Naruto's heart. Naruto's Crimson Rasengan came forward to meet it before the two jutsu met in an ominous crash of lightning and raw chakra. Lightning arced out from the collision, shocking both, before suddenly the Chidori glanced off the Rasengan, and the two jutsu hit home. Naruto's Rasengan caught Sasuke on the shoulder and it dug into it, grinding past bone and severing the hand from the body. The Chidori, however, continued uninterrupted on its path, entering Naruto's body through his chest and exiting through his back, puncturing his heart in the middle. There was a shocked silence, both looked at each other, not believing what had happened. Then Sasuke fell backwards, the stump of his arm spewing blood, while Naruto crumpled where he stood, Sasuke's disembodied arm still sticking out of his chest. Sasuke let out an ear-piercing scream as he clutched at his ruined shoulder, his curse seal's influence causing the open wound to bubble, even as it continued to spurt blood. Naruto collapsed face down, his weight crushing the arm beneath, Sasuke's fingers poking out between his shoulder blades. Naruto's Kyuubi cloak pulsed before it contracted into a layer surrounding Naruto, who looked to have lost consciousness. Black smoke started billowing from Naruto's crumpled figure before a otherworldly pressure descended on the valley. The roar of the waterfall was suddenly muted, and the pool's water began to recede around him as Naruto began to slowly levitate, carried by the smoke. His hair was flaring behind him as he rose, and the pain-addled eyes of Sasuke stared in disbelief as he struggled to escape the unrelenting pressure in the clearing. With a sickening squelch, Sasuke's arm fell out of Naruto's body, leaving a gaping wound through Naruto's sternum. The destroyed heart was clearly visible. However, no blood was flowing. Naruto seemed to have been frozen in time as he rose higher into the air. Finally, when he was about 6 feet in the air he stopped rising, instead hovering in the air. Without any warning whatsoever, Naruto's jacket and shirt disintegrated, showing off his Jinchuriki seal, which glowed an eerie pulsing crimson. Then it seemed to crack. Suddenly, the skin surrounding the seal began to turn an ugly blue-gray color as a miasma of a white gelatinous substance grew in its wake, covering Naruto like a cloak. When the blue-gray skin reached Naruto's head, his eyes popped open, and he let out a tortured scream as the discolored skin covered his face. His hair seemingly bleached from the roots outwards while still flared outwards till his hair was colored a bone white. His eyes were rolling to the back of his sockets, his eyes colored a soulless black as they stared unseeingly. With an ominous scraping noise, as if someone was carving it in, the kanji for death slowly carved itself over the swirl of the original seal in a pitch-black ink that shined eerily. As it finished, Naruto gave a last agonized scream before he hung limp, still in the air. The surroundings seemed pulse, a beam of black burst out from his body, shooting upwards, as large constructs shaped like prayer beads made from the same gelatinous substance covering him, burst out from his unconscious form, anchoring him in the air and wrapping around the thrashing Sasuke. He was floating, sinking, drowning. There was a hot poker pressing against his stomach, lava flowing up his body scorching his skin. There was something missing from his chest, he couldn't breathe, he couldn't move. He heard a raw voice screaming in agony, hurting his ears by the volume, before he realized that he was the one screaming, that the screams of agony were coming from his own mouth, but he couldn't stop. So he continued to scream. Scream, even as he coughed up blood, even as the act of screaming itself hurt him enough to make him want to scream all over again. Dimly, he registered a new source of hurt, almost lost within the pains racking his body, an insistent itch, half pain and half irritation, that grazed his stomach as it traced an unfamiliar pattern on his skin. However, he realized quite acutely when it had ended. For as soon as the itch had stopped, a blinding pain had blossomed in his head, the angry pain of an acute migraine, making itself felt even beyond the pains of a quite wrecked body. And then suddenly it was all gone. The sudden lack of pain hit him hard, it was like a sudden sense of vertigo, he felt sick. With a whimper, Naruto curled up on himself. Slowly, when the shock had faded somewhat and reason had reasserted itself, Naruto tried to take stock of his surroundings. He was lying on scorched earth, and it seemed as if he had none of the wounds that he had been inflicted with. He was in some sort of building, that much was clear. It was a hall of some sort, with white walls and some sort of throne at one end on an elevated stage, facing a set of well-worn cushions, colored a bone white. A rumbling chuckle behind him caused him to suddenly turn around, only to come face to face with a monstrous figure. It was humanoid, only it was about 15 feet tall, and it had blue-gray skin, with a bone-white mane of hair flaring out behind him. Its beady black eyes were staring at Naruto with a look of predatory amusement. Naruto gulped. Whatever was going to happen, Naruto had a feeling it was not going to be good for his health. My, Ninjin. Aren't you an interesting one? Naruto swallowed a lump in his throat. Something told him that acting brashly right now would not be wise. The creature, whatever it was, just had that aura of power that said not to mess with it. Now what did Iruka-sensei told him to do when meeting a possible noble? The creature chuckled. While it is interesting to listen to your thoughts, Uzumaki Naruto, he emphasized the name, and Naruto swallowed reflexively. My time is not without value. I am the Shinigami, and you have been brought here because you have attempted to use my power, and it intrigues me as to how that is possible, especially seeing as I have no contract with you. The Shinigami? Oh, damn it all, he was screwed. But how would he have used the power of the death god? Naruto was not someone who considered himself spiritually enlightened, even though certain knowledge was required in sealing, and the only reason he had even heard of the particular arcane deity was, oh, hell. The Shinigami suddenly laughed, a booming laugh, echoing throughout the chamber. Quite literally, little Ninjin. Still chuckling, he added, and of course, the seal. I forgot how I helped that strange blonde to seal Kurama. Even in the midst of freaking out over his very possible disintegration at the hands of a deity, Naruto couldn't help but feel a little insulted for his father. Strange blonde. It was not as if having an infestation of bone-white hair and blue-gray skin were exactly normal. The Shinigami grunted. If you wish to present a good impression, you are failing miserably, Ninjin. Infestation of hair, indeed. Finally something caught his notice, and Naruto went rigid. Shinigami-sama, are you reading my thoughts? Obviously. The Shinigami seemed slightly annoyed that Naruto had even asked, so Naruto supposed that it was considered a right by the gods. Then again, he was probably listening into this conversation as well. Of course, Ninjin. By the way, I said as much at the beginning of this conversation. Well, what did you know? It was true. Though he could be excused, Naruto thought, as he was still getting over the fact that he was meeting with the Shinigami. Oh, he was really going to be screwed if he didn't talk his way out of this, but how? Looking at the deity, Naruto began to babble. Shinigami-sama, about using your power. You see, my Kekkei Genkai allows me to channel any seal in my body. It's just, your seal got exposed recently when I underwent some changes. I swear I didn't mean to. So since it's not really my fault, I can go now, right? He winced, waiting for something to happen. The Shinigami stared at him, a look of intrigue on his face. What to do, he pondered aloud, seemingly more for Naruto's benefit than his own. What to do, indeed. I suppose it is my fault in a way, putting a seal on you, isn't it, Ninjin? However, I can't simply let you use my power with impunity, that would just set a bad example. I can't simply remove your seal, not when I was honor-bound to make that seal in the first place, so what am I going to do with you? Idly scratching his chin with the dagger that he was grasping in one hand, the Shinigami stared at Naruto ponderingly, while Naruto did his best to blend into the ground. Then he smirked. Naruto repressed his flinch, he didn't want to appear intimidated in front of the deity, even though it probably knew it already. Well, why not? It should be interesting to see, if nothing else. Suddenly the Shinigami was in front of Naruto, staring into his eyes with a serious gaze. Well, Ninjin, I've decided to let you go for this particular offense. Naruto's sigh was audible, but the smirk on the face of the deity soon had Naruto freezing in fear. What sort of trap was the deity weaving? With a leisurely wave of his spindly arm, the Shinigami continued, other than, of course, the natural consequence of channeling my power in a human body, but you expected that already, didn't you? Naruto nervously cleared his throat before addressing the Shinigami, who was squatting in front of him, peering into his face with a disturbing grin on his face. Excuse me, Shinigami-sama, but exactly what consequences? The Shinigami gave a careless shrug. Oh, that's nothing, it's just that my power strains your life force when a mortal such as you uses it. I'll say you'll lose about 5 years life force for this stunt, but then, sealing such a large soul is no easy task, is it? 5 years of his life. Though he supposed it wasn't much, and he was a ninja from a clan said to have an average life expectancy of 200 years in a profession with an average life expectancy of 30. So perhaps the fact that those extra years could end up helping him, instead of just getting wasted, was a good thing? However, Shinigami-sama, what did you mean seal a soul? A chuckle was the only reply he received before he felt a sudden pulling sensation. Looking down, he could see his wounds, trophies of his recent battles, appear on his body, accompanied with an ever unwelcome sensation of pain. That was a shame, he really had enjoyed not feeling like his organs were liquefying on him. Then he was getting more insubstantial, and the surroundings were getting darker. The last thing he saw before darkness enveloped him was the Shinigami's face peering into his own, an oddly proud look on his face. Then everything was gone, leaving him alone with the pain and the last words of the Shinigami echoing in his mind. "It's time for you go back, Ninjin, and remember this, everything has consequences." Power flooded Mito's body as the clone suddenly dispersed. It was a heady feeling, the replenishing of the pitiful chakra reserves of her chakra shell overflowing and leaving a tingly sensation in her body. However, she could not waste any time to enjoy the sensations. The agonized expression on the clone's face just prior to its dispersal had stuck with her, as well as the kanji that had appeared over the Shiki Fujin. It was rather obvious that her worst fears had come to pass. Naruto had accessed the Shinigami's seal, actually channeled the power of a god. It was something that every Fuinjutsu user had nightmares about. What Naruto had done was certainly not unique. No, channeling the power of various arcane deities was an integral part of Fuinjutsu, but there was a difference between channeling the power through entreating to the higher powers and manipulating the power of the deities themselves, one that many ancient Fuinjutsu pioneers had found, to their horror. Stealing from a deity was a surefire way to attract their wrath, and many childhood fables Mito had heard during her childhood had included those men who had tried to steal the power of a god and what befell them. Still, perhaps the fact that he had not intended to use a god's power would keep him alive. That was the only sliver of hope that Mito had as she raced towards Naruto. Not caring of her own still sizzling wounds, she made her way out of the forest to the Valley of the End. Leaping on top of the statue of her deceased husband, Mito paused in shock. What was in front of her was a wasteland, that much was obvious. The battle-cratered ground, which had already seen one of the most destructive fights in shinobi history, was pockmarked and littered with brand-new craters from the latest conflict. The statues, both of her husband and of Madara, were crumbling from the repeated impacts they had received. Mito noticed, with an irrational burst of pride, that most had been caused by Naruto's chains, judging from the gouges in the stonework. Within this scene of raw destruction, however, there was an extremely unnatural phenomenon in action. Near the foot of the Madara statue, there was an area of the pool from which the water had receded in a neat circle, exposing the wet stone bottom, a severed and bleeding arm resting on it. And at its epicenter, floating around 3 meters above water level, was a transformed Naruto who looked to be quite unconscious. His bone-white hair was flaring behind him, and his blue-gray pigmented skin emphasized the crimson glowing seal on his abdomen as he floated in place. A chakra construct resembling a set of praying beads had erupted from the center of the seal to wrap around a feebly struggling Sasuke. Even as she leapt down off the statue, she could see the prayer bead structures pulsing sinisterly as they tightened further, trapping Sasuke within them. The beads then began to emit a violent white glow before the beads separated from the body, hovering in the air with a screaming wraith of Sasuke, which had separated from the material body held between them. Mito approached as close as she dared, but being merely a chakra construct herself, she couldn't risk getting closer, not without risking destabilization. While she may have made her body rather durable, she had not expected her body to be exposed to divine power, and she instinctively knew that her body would come off worse in that particular exchange. Therefore she was stuck, powerless, until whatever happened with the seal subsided and she could reach Naruto, who looked to have reached well past the point of almost dead already. Finally, with a sigh of displaced air, the wraith-like Sasuke was completely absorbed into the prayer beads, which then floated back to the airborne Naruto, sunk into his body, and disappeared. Sasuke flopped lifelessly to the ground, a complex seal forming on his stomach. The curse seal flared a final time before it dispersed with an audible crack, leaving Sasuke's still body lying on the stone feet of his ancestor's statue. Meanwhile, Mito was trying to restrain herself from running forward when Naruto's eyes snapped open, even as Naruto's hair and skin began to turn back to their original shades. However, despite the hole in his chest finally sealing over as the Kyuubi chakra asserted itself, Naruto was steadily losing color, an unhealthy pallor visible in his face, making the whisker marks stand out. By the time he floated down, slowly landing on the water that had come rushing back, his hair was bleaching again and his skin turning flaky from ill health. Across the Shiki Fujin, surrounding the spiral seal in the death kanji, 3 Tomo materialized. An outline of the Sharingan briefly manifested in Naruto's pitch-black eyes before the design shattered and revealed normal blue. With a moan, Naruto slumped as he slipped back into unconsciousness. Shaking herself out of her stupor, Mito started towards Naruto before she was roughly pushed out of the way as a blonde and green blur sped past her. A second later, Sanada's entourage flew past her as the Hokage's panicked cry was heard. Naruto. Well, this is just perfect, Shikamaru thought sarcastically as lured Tayuya back into the trees, hoping to ensnare her in his shadow. Now it was getting simply ridiculous. Even after taking a chakra pill, his chakra levels were just above exhaustion, and combined with the physical fatigue caused by the strange jutsu that her summons had used, he was ready to collapse. It was not that Tayuya did not get caught. While quite analytical, Shikamaru had managed to catch her in a trap quite a few times. However, each time she had been in actual danger, she would just break out of the trap with her ridiculous strength, forcing him back on the defensive. As she pursued him into a grove in the woods, Shikamaru set his jaw as he prepared for the final part of the trap. In stark contrast to his other traps, Shikamaru had, due to necessity, gone for the kill this time. Shikamaru, like many of the other Rookie 9, had not killed until now. The only ones he knew to have killed were Shino, Kiba and Ino. However, unlike the others, it was not by accident, shielding by his sensei, or even a dislike for killing that kept Shikamaru from killing his opponents. He had a much more unimpressive reason for that. He simply didn't want to be forced into the counseling that every shinobi had to undergo after their first kill, especially since he would probably be appointed to Ino's dad, who was the only person other than Ino and his mother that terrified him. Now, thanks to the Uchiha, he would have to sit for hours he could spend cloud watching inside the stuffy Yamanaka home, listening to Ino's dad go on and on about his feelings about killing, while staring unblinkingly at him. Or he would die, at the hands of a girl no less. Neither option really appealed to him. Why did they make him a chunin anyway? All this was just troublesome. Kneeling in the shadow of a giant tree trunk, Shikamaru sighed mournfully as he slowly weaved through the hand seals for one of the shadow manipulation jutsu unique to his clan. Tayuya was slowly advancing, taunting him as she entered the grove opposite the tree he was hiding behind. The grove in question was ringed by 6 equally massive trees forming a hexagon, their treetops forming enormous shadows under them. From the direction facing Tayuya as she entered the clearing, each of the trees looked perfectly normal, if rather abnormally large. In the direction facing away from the grove, however, each tree had a sizzling seal tag placed at knee height. It was time. As Shikamaru finished his hand seal sequence, holding his hands in the rat seal, his shadow merged with the tree in front of it before a tendril of shadow sneaked out on either side to merge with the next tree in the circle. Soon the shadows had formed a ring around the grove containing Tayuya, just as he had planned. The flare tags were bound to detonate any second now, which was when his biggest gamble to date. The jutsu he was attempting to use was traditionally done with kunai and needed a far larger amount of chakra, one of the few true finishing moves in Inara's arsenal. His grasp of the technique was fairly elementary though, which was why he was relying on the trees, which was a far larger and more stable shadow anchor than a thrown kunai. He was also relying on the flare tags he had attached to the other side of the trees to help channel the shadows in a fairly linear path. For existing shadow movements lessen chakra requirement, and he was pretty sure he would have come up short on chakra otherwise. Finally, Tayuya reached the very center of the grove just as the flare tags detonated, throwing 6 enormous shadows of the trees into Tayuya. Shikamaru grinned viciously as he ran through 2 more seals before holding his hand in the rat seal again. Shadow cage skewering. On hearing his voice, Tayuya immediately tried to jump away, but she found herself immobilized as the first part of Shikamaru's jutsu activated, the shadows that the flares cast on her immobilizing and wrapping around her body. Even as Tayuya was getting bound by the tree's shadows, the lines connecting the trees and the shadows on the ground bubbled sinisterly. With a sharp sound, thin skewers formed out of the shadow before they lanced into the trapped Kunoichi, piercing her from every direction as they grew through her in a split second. With a muted sound, the shadows dissipated as Shikamaru ran out of chakra to maintain the jutsu. Stumbling out from behind the tree, he found himself staring into Tayuya's eyes as she looked back at him, an expression of abject shock etched on her frozen features. She looked strangely unharmed, and for a split second Shikamaru descended into a mild panic, thinking she had survived, when she swayed unsteadily before she toppled over in a heap. Shikamaru could feel the onset of chakra exhaustion coming on, clouding his thoughts as his head grew increasingly heavy. However, his gaze refused to move from the crumpled figure in front of him as he stood staring at Tayuya, observing everything from the dark skin and pink hair of her cursed seal form to the extremely small wounds peppering her figure, slowly leaking rivulets of blood, now escaping her still body. His eyes were fixed on the glazed eyes of his first kill staring back at him, even as he finally collapsed to his knees, the combination of exhaustion and chakra exhaustion taking their toll on him. Then his legs gave out completely and he was lying on the ground next to Tayuya, staring at her wrist which was adorned with a white tattoo of a spiral, with its end flaring out that was standing out starkly on her dark skin. He could have sworn he had seen it somewhere before, but it was getting strangely tiring to think. A nap sounded good right about now. Thus it was that a rather bedraggled-looking Neji emerged from the forest, having had Gamariki dispel some time ago, to find Shikamaru lying on the ground. Grumbling under his breath, Neji proceeded to hoist the unconscious genius over his shoulder before leaving the clearing to search for the rest of his scattered team. On the ground, the white tattoo on Tayuya's wrist suddenly lit up before fading into nothingness, unnoticed by Neji as he hurried to the other's aid. A few miles away, a specter of a long-dead woman suddenly looked in Tayuya's direction, a puzzled look on her face, before she turned back to hovering over a still body lying near a waterfall, a puzzled frown on her face. On the forest floor, Tayuya's body cooled, glazed eyes staring up at the canopy above. Tenten cursed fluently as she jumped back, holding onto her side which was leaking blood from a claw swipe that had gotten lucky. She really should have known better, she thought to herself angrily. Even armed with kunai and as gifted as she was with weapons, you did not enter into a close-range battle with an Inuzuka and expect to get away unscathed. Though it wasn't exactly an Inuzuka she was facing. From what she had noticed, the attack of the strange sound shinobi worked quite similarly to the Yamanaka mind techniques, minus the interrogation abilities. It was also quite different in its own way, being much more physical than the Yamanaka counterpart. Therefore what she was now facing was the same skilled shinobi as earlier, only he was in possession of the animalistic body of Kiba, thus she was forced on the defensive, unable to attack due to the fact that the person attacking her was doing so using her teammate's body. It didn't help that he seemed to have more skill with kunai than even she had. Cursing under her breath, Tenten reached behind her for one of the many weapon scrolls she carried. With a quick twist of her wrist and a puff of smoke, the weapon in the scroll unsealed and she caught it easily. Vulcan grinned at her in amusement. A Johyu? You're really going to fight me with a Johyu? What are you, Asuna puppeteer? Tenten started to twirl the leaden weight around her, slowly building up momentum. This is all I need to bring you down, bastard. Vulcan's mouth twitched as he settled into a stance, the constant twitching in a few limbs, indicating that Kiba was still fighting for control. However, Tenten didn't hold out much hope for him driving the sound shinobi out without help. The Inuzuka had been quite low on chakra after his combination transformation. A sudden rustling in the bushes distracted both from their stare-off, and as they twisted around to identify the new threat, a salvo of kunai flew towards the Vulcan-possessed Kiba. Even as he ducked under the kunai and leapt into the stream, a set of blurs exited the forest to surround Tenten. Tenten instinctively drew a kunai before she looked into the faces of those who had surrounded her. Kakashi-san, Shizuna-san. What are you doing here? Orochimaru-sama, are you alright? The young, soft voice of the bespectacled silver-haired boy was laced with worry. However, when the one addressed, a tall thin man wrapped in bandages, turned towards him, he instinctively straightened up, knowing that Orochimaru's rage was not to be taken slightly. After a moment, Orochimaru spoke, his voice a sibilant hiss. Ponderous and high-pitched, the voice was one that naturally inspired terror. However, it was evident that it was not something he consciously maintained. The man's very presence simply exuded a saturated killing intent in such volume that it was hard to think of the man without it. Silence, Kabuto. I shall rest. The body transfer is more tiring than I care to feel. With that, Orochimaru slowly lifted himself off of his chair, staggering upright with an obvious effort. Even then he staggered tiredly. Kabuto immediately rushed to his side, only to be roughly dissuaded from coming near. I can take care of myself, Kabuto. Orochimaru's voice carried the slightest hint of threat in it, making Kabuto hastily backtrack. Of course, Orochimaru-sama. Orochimaru turned round and slowly walked towards the open doorway, only to be halted by Kabuto again. Orochimaru-sama. What are you going to do about Uchiha Sasuke and the Sound 4? For a moment, there was silence. Then Orochimaru gave a dismissive shrug, resuming his walk as his words floated back to Kabuto, accompanied by an amused chuckle. Sasuke-kun has 3 years to get here, Kabuto-kun. If you want, go pick him up. As for the Sound 4. He nonchalantly waved his hand as he stepped through the doorway, his whispered answer barely reaching Kabuto. Haven't you been asking for some test subjects? He's got extreme chakra exhaustion, he's going into shock. Steady, steady. Rabbit, give me the Hyoragan. Hyoragan, Hokage-sama? But his body. He's in Uzumaki, he can handle it. Sanada and one of her Anbu were leaning over the limp and bloodied form of Naruto, while Mito hovered behind them. A few feet away, Asuma was lazily smoking a cigarette as he looked on as the Hokage frantically tried to treat Naruto when a polite cough caught his attention. Looking up, he found himself looking into ghoulish black eyes peering at him through the slits in an Anbu mask mere inches from his face. Ah! With a yell, Asuma stumbled back, cigarette falling from his lips, only to find the Anbu in question looking at him quizzically. Panting slightly, Asuma looked at the Anbu, bug-eyed from shock. "Don't do that." The Anbu tilted his head slightly before speaking in a monotone. "Do what?" "That." This Anbu was a strange one, Asuma decided, now decidedly more interested in the somewhat unique specimen before him. Usually Anbu operated under the premise of being unseen and unheard. For a member of one of the most reclusive shinobi units to actually initiate conversation was decidedly strange. Looking more carefully at the Anbu in question, Asuma found him to be even more eccentric than what his introduction had made him out to be. For one, Asuma could make out a decidedly odd forehead protector protruding from under his cat mask, which seemed to cover his jawline in a parody of the signature protector of the second. Also, his unblinking stare was somewhat unnerving. "I'm afraid I don't understand you, Asuma-senpai." Asuma sighed. "Never mind." This guy was definitely strange, but being in the Anbu did strange things to people, and this guy didn't seem to be that bad. After all, he could have turned out like Kakashi. Asuma shuddered at that thought. He liked Kakashi, he really did, but he didn't think Konoha could survive two of the eccentric shinobi. The Anbu cleared his throat. "Asuma-senpai, why didn't you go with Kakashi-senpai? I thought your genin were in the group?" He seemed honestly inquisitive. Asuma hesitated before shrugging and deciding to answer. After all, it wasn't as if it was some big secret. Leaning into the stone statue and lighting up another cigarette, he slowly started to explain. "That's because I know what they're up to, and anyway, I wouldn't want to add an emotional component to the mission. Besides, Shizuna needed just one more ninja, and I had a feeling Kakashi didn't need to see what had happened here." He looked at the bloodied ground, to the bloodless face of Naruto, as Tsunade fussed over him and added under his breath, "And I was right." The Anbu tilted his head inquisitively. "You know what they're up to?" Asuma smirked around his cigarette, looking at the sky. "It's a tradition for the Ino Shikacho teams in Konoha," he explained. "The latest team gets a set of seal-engraved earrings, an old heirloom of the clans, which use the Yamanaka's powers to psychically connect all members of the team, plus their sensei. What do they do? It's for increasing teamwork within the teams, and it's a fairly drastic step. Once you initiate the bond, it takes a long time to wean off of it, but that is not even the true danger. Once you put on the artifacts, there are literally no secrets within the team, it bears your innermost thoughts to each other." Asuma chuckled. "As you can imagine, it causes some quite amusing scenarios. Thank goodness the bond with the sensei is much weaker than the ones between the team, I can only feel their general health." The Anbu stared at him. Asuma, feeling the intense stare, looked down before he sweat dropped. "You really have no idea of human behavior, do you?" he muttered before continuing with a wry grin. "Let's just say it was quite some time before Shikamaru or Chaoji could look at Sasuke without retching." "Ah." The Anbu spoke before he held up his hand in the classic inquisitive posture. "I do not understand." Asuma's sweat dropped. Never mind," he said awkwardly. "So anyway, Shika's gone and knocked himself out, but he's stable, and from the chakra levels Chaoji-kun has barely fought at all, so they're all right. Besides, the forest is now crawling with Konoha ninja." Sparing a glance at Naruto, he continued more somberly, "And it isn't as if the enemy has many shinobi alive now." The Anbu nodded slightly before speaking. His voice, Asuma noticed, was a very carefully structured monotone that revealed no tells to his inner thoughts. That in itself was a tell, however, as it told Asuma that this was a veteran Anbu who had probably served on the force for quite some time. It was a subtle sign, but it was fairly easy to identify if you knew what to look for. Only a few operatives, such as Kakashi and Orochimaru, who had surpassed the veteran stage to legend, had ever truly managed to insert false emotional tells into conversation. Suddenly, the Anbu was even more interesting than before. "Uzumaki-san has indeed been quite effective." Asuma snorted. "Effective?" The boy simply tore the enemy apart. "I swear, I haven't seen carnage like that since Guy went on one of his youthful rampages in his wild days." Lost in his reminiscing, Asuma was brought back by the frantic waving of the Anbu. He blithely ignored the ridiculous sight of an Anbu acting like a schoolgirl. It was a skill you tended to pick up when hanging around the likes of Kakashi. Or Guy. Or Anko. Or Genma. Or Raito. Or Ibiki. Asuma's sweat dropped. Maybe it was time to find some friends that weren't insane? Shaking his head, he looked at the panicking Anbu. "What?" The Anbu leaned towards him conspiringly before whispering in a terrified whisper. "Don't say the name." Huh? At Asuma's dumbfounded look, the Anbu started to explain hurriedly. "The beast. The green beast. Don't say the name. It will come." Asuma stared at the panicking Anbu incredulously. Was the Anbu scared of Guy? Laughing under his breath, he was mocking the increasingly paranoid Anbu, who was jumping at every rustling leaf when he detected an enormous chakra signature at the edge of his perception. Immediately his chakra blades were out and blazing with wind chakra, and wooden beams peeked out of the arm guards of the Anbu. Mokuton? Asuma filed that away for later. Could it be that he had talked with the elusive Mokuton no Tenzo? As they turned towards the chakra signature blazing towards them from the forest. Interestingly though, it was heading towards them from Konoha's direction. "Sanada-sama?" Asuma called out. The Hokage grunted irritably, still working on the comatose patient lying below. Looking up briefly, she wiped sweat from her brow as she looked at Asuma seriously. "I need at least 2 minutes more to stabilize Naruto. Hold them off, whoever they are. I don't want them anywhere near here before the 2 minutes are up." The Anbu looked at Asuma. Asuma nodded back, the wind chakra coating around his chakra blades flaring as they settled into stances waiting for the unknown chakra signature to appear. The chakra was getting closer and Asuma tensed when a green blur burst out of the forest. Ducking the wood beams heading at him from the Anbu, the green blur skidded to a halt a few feet in front of Asuma. The Anbu yelped. "Sanada-sama, I bring most unyouthful news," a boisterous voice exclaimed before the source turned to stare at the horrified Anbu. "Anbu-san, that was very unyouthful," he said reproachfully. "Perhaps I could interest you in a youthful spar later to reignite your flames of youth." Asuma's eyebrows twitched even as the Anbu gave him a wounded glare before skulking off to hide behind Sanada. "Guy. What are you doing here?" Vulcan Kiba stared at the newcomers critically. "So the great Jonin of Konoha arrives," he snarked before he smirked. "But if I were you, I wouldn't try to harm me." "Well, if you don't want to kill your friend too." Kakashi slowly pushed up his forehead protector, uncovering his Sharingan. He stared at the possessed shinobi before a small smirk of his own crept across his face. "Akasaichu. It's been quite some time since I've seen one of you, in fact, the last time I saw you was in the Third War." His smirk grew as he continued, while Khan looked shocked. "Last I heard your clan was wiped out by Iwa. Though that does tend to happen when a clan is as weak as yours. Shut up before I kill you all." Vulcan growled at the Jonin, who ignored him totally, instead turning to Shizune. "Shizune-san, think you can handle it?" Shizune turned to look at Kakashi, looking rather insulted. "Think I can handle it?" A small grin, totally unlike her usual timid personality blooming on her face, she turned to Vulcan who was staring at her, irritated. With a slight hum of medical chakra her hand lit up with a chakra scalpel. "Remember, Kakashi-kun, I'm an apprentice of a Sannin, just like your sensei. And as for you, your clan techniques didn't work against your main enemies, mainly because Iwa just cut their losses and killed their own with your clan," she added, looking at Vulcan. Vulcan snorted. "You Konoha bastards are too soft for that," he scoffed. "So what are you going to do, woman?" "This," Shizune said softly. There was a sound of displaced air, and before Vulcan could even blink, Shizune had appeared in front of him, chakra scalpel blazing as it tore through his chest, leaving behind no visible wound. Before Vulcan could even think to counterattack, she had ghosted back to her original position, watching him expectantly. Vulcan flailed around in surprise for a moment before regaining his balance. "You missed," he stated, looking somewhat shocked, but he soon regained his superior sneer. "I don't know how you did it, but you won't do it again." Kakashi snorted as Shizune deactivated her chakra scalpel and relaxed. "Nope. The fight's already over," he stated blandly. "Wah." Vulcan's retort was cut off midstream as he keeled over, vomiting blood on the ground. "Ah." Yelling in agony, Vulcan Kiba's body began to bubble before Vulcan's body began to gradually emerge from Kiba's, both screaming in agony when they weren't coughing up blood. Shizune looked on clinically, as if it was nothing more than a cadaver in one of her master's experiments. Finally, after Vulcan had totally separated from Kiba, Vulcan's host immediately falling limp as Shizune nonchalantly approached the pair. Vulcan stared hatefully at her. "What did you do to me?" he demanded between his hoarse coughing. Shizune looked at him, face devoid of compassion as she crouched in front of the unconscious Kiba. Her hands lighting up again, this time a gentle green instead of the harsh white it had been before. "I cut up the lining of your lungs and nicked an artery," she explained unsympathetically. "Even now your lungs are filling with fluid. Soon you will find it hard to breathe, and then you will drown in your own blood. You." Whatever Vulcan had tried to say was lost as he succumbed to another fit of coughing blood now leaking from his nostrils as he curled around himself. Tenten shuddered, shocked at Shizuna's cruelty, before she jumped in surprise as Shizuna looked straight at her. "Remember this lesson, Tenten-san. This is what happens when someone is overly reliant on one skill. Any skill can always be countered." Tenten nodded weakly. Suddenly Kiba came to with a gasp, coughing up blood. Shaking his head, he looked around, noticing Shizuna who was still crouched over him employing the mystical palm technique. "Thanks, Shizuna-san." Shizuna gave him a somewhat strained smile. "It was a close call. Now we have to go. Sanada-sama may need my help." End of Chapter 9. Chapter 10. Homeward Bound. Asuma's eyebrow twitched. "Guy. What are you doing here?" Guy stood at attention. "I have a most unyouthful message for Tsunade-sama," he repeated. Asuma, wincing at the tone of the exuberant Jonin, groaned pathetically. "What is it?" Guy's reply was cut off as Tsunade sat up before a punch slammed across Guy's face, tossing him 20 feet away and into a tree. "Guy. What have I told you about shouting when I'm working?" Tsunade seethed, a malevolent aura surrounding her. Asuma gulped. If Guy didn't have a good excuse, it seemed probable that the great green beast was going to be skinned by a demonic senju. Guy groaned from where he was, slumped in the middle of an explosion of wooden splinters. Not to?" he squeaked, staring as Tsunade approached him, her fists erupting chakra. She was just a few steps from Guy, who was trying to shrink into himself like he was one of his summons, when a voice called out to her, startling Asuma and the Anbu. "That's quite enough, Tsutsu. We don't have time for one of your temper tantrums. Not when Naruto-kun needs immediate medical help, you know." Asuma, the Anbu, and Guy all looked in the direction of the voice. At first, there was nothing, then, gradually, a misty form appeared, coalescing to form the figure of a petite woman in formal dress. And she didn't seem to be happy with the lot of them. Tsunade's shoulders slumped. "Sorry. Grandmother," she sighed, her hair falling over her eyes as she turned back. "It's just." "What, Tsunade-sama?" Asuma interrupted, swiveling to look between Tsunade and the wraith. "Your grandmother? How?" Tsunade's shoulders slumped further as she gave a tired sigh, her hand going to the bridge of her nose as she tried to stave off her headache. "I'm not in the mood for this," she groaned before she gave Mito an evil look. "If you had to appear right now, you can take care of the introductions," she huffed as she stalked back to where Naruto was and began healing him once more. Eyeing the Anbu and the Jonin that were watching her with obvious curiosity, Mito turned towards them, smiling gently. "Hello, I'm Mito Senju ni Uzumaki, wife of the Shadame Hokage and the first Jinchuariki of the Kyuubi. Nice to meet you." Behind her, Tsunade face-palmed as the jaws of the assembled Jonin dropped simultaneously. "Grandmother," she groaned, "I didn't tell you to confuse them even more." Mito blinked, then blinked again. "I don't know what you mean." Tsunade groaned, the medical chakra in her hands flickering out as she finished Naruto's treatment. "Of course you don't." Briefly looking at Guy, who cringed, she continued with a long-suffering sigh. "Now Guy, if you don't want to get punched back to Konoha, just tell us the message you brought." For a moment her eyes seemed to drill through Guy with her glare. "Without any mention of youth, if you know what's good for you." Guy gulped. "Ah. Yes, Tsunade-sama," he paused, cringing, before continuing hesitantly. "Shimura Danzo-sama has declared war against Suna with the aid of the council." A shocked silence descended on the group, only broken by a stifled yelp by the rabid Anbu. Asuma's chakra blades hung limp from his fingers as he gaped at the green-suited Jonin in thinly suppressed horror. While the Jonin and Mito looked between Guy and Tsunade apprehensively, Tsunade had gone very still. The silence was broken by the sound of gritting teeth from an expressionless Tsunade. For a moment, everybody looked at her, expecting some indication of anger. Instead, she got up almost robotically before giving Guy a blank stare. How did Danzo get it through? In the absence of the sitting Hokage, such decisions have to be taken in council with the civilian elders, the Hokage advisors and the division commanders. Her voice was low, almost nonchalant, except for the sliver of venom that crept into the voice when she mentioned Danzo. Collectively, all the assembled Jonin had a similar thought: it would not be fun to be Danzo when Tsunade next met him. Guy swallowed. Somehow the comp Tsunade was more terrifying than an enraged one. Hokage-sama, the Onyu. Faced with Tsunade's gimlet eye, Guy quickly bit back the rest of the word. Sorry, Hokage-sama. Danzo-sama has exposed Sabaku no Gaara's status as a Jinchuariki and is using Naruto-san's unfortunate circumstances to rally support for the movement. At that, Tsunade went, if possible, even more still. Faint wisps of chakra arsing around her form, she looked into Guy's eyes, her own burning with the promise of retribution. What? Her voice was scarcely louder than a whisper, but the words, uttered whip-like by the enraged Hokage, nevertheless reached each person there. For a moment, even Mito flinched at the sheer venom in Sanada's tone before she turned towards her granddaughter. Now is not the time, Sanada-chan. Sanada turned to look at her, her eyes blazing, before she paused at the way Mito had addressed her. What do you mean now's not the time? She asked tiredly. Ignoring her, Mito walked past her to where Naruto was lying before she bent down and hefted Naruto onto her shoulder in a fireman's carry. I don't know about you, but I'm not about to bring an injured child, not to mention my heir, to the village when Danzo seems to be building up a mob to lynch him. Sanada seemed to deflate, all the anger draining out of her at the realization. That's true, but where are you going to take him? He needs to rest and recuperate. The drain to his life energy is no joke, grandmother, he could fall into a coma any moment now. Mito turned towards her, giving Sanada a wan smile. Granddaughter, you are forgetting he's in Uzumaki, you know. Besides, I was thinking, Sutsu, it's time for him to visit his roots. Sanada stared at her. Grandmother, you don't mean. I mean, that's a ruin. Surely you don't. Mito's lips twitched. You're babbling, Sutsu. Besides, not all of it is ruins, you know. Sanada glared at her. Mito smirked back at her challengingly. Have it your way, grandmother, Sanada said resignedly after a moment. Mito nodded, all frivolity gone, as she turned to leave. However, she immediately jumped away as Asuma shunshined in front of her, chakra blades blazing. Hokage-sama? He called out, staring suspiciously at Mito. Sanada frowned. Stand down, Asuma, she said tiredly. But Hokage-sama, you can't let a non-Konoha shinobi take Konoha's Jinchuriki. He argued, not taking his eyes off Mito's tense form. Sanada scowled back at him, making him flinch back. Asuma. She drawled, irritation obvious in her tone. I told her to take Naruto, removing one of our shinobi from a potentially volatile situation. Her eyes narrowed dangerously. So what is it, Asuma? Do I have to explain every decision I make, or are you refusing orders from your Hokage? Asuma stuttered. Ah. I'm sorry, Sanada-sama. He said after a moment, chastised. Sanada sighed again, covering her eyes. I'm sorry too, Asuma, she mumbled, it's just. I understand Hokage-sama. Asuma interrupted her, and Sanada gave him an unsteady smile. Thanks. Mito scoffed at Asuma before calling out at Sanada as she walked past him. I assume you can take care of the Danzo issue on your own? Don't worry, grandmother. I'm going to make the bastard suffer, she said menacingly, a bloodthirsty smirk creeping across her face. By the way, I'll send Shizune along later, that brat needs a medic to look after him, at least for the next few days. Fine. I have to go now if I want to reach my destination before tomorrow. With a nod of assent and the slight noise of a shunshin, Mito disappeared in a flash of smoke. Being unconscious was troublesome. Waking up was more so. Nara Shikamaru groaned as he slowly came to from his impromptu nap on the forest floor. From what he felt, he was being carried piggyback by a shinobi. He could feel the starchy hardness of a Konoha standard flak jacket digging uncomfortably into his ribs and the smell of smoke emanating from the figure carrying him. While many shinobi smoked intermittently to steady their nerves, it was generally considered bad form to smoke so much that the smell clung to them, seeing as it was a possible means of tracking the shinobi. There were only 2 shinobi he knew that smoked so regularly that the smell clung to their clothes, and one of them, the Sandaime Hokage, was dead. So it was Asuma-sensei carrying him. That was interesting. Giving up the half-formed plans of pretending to be asleep. It wouldn't matter anyway, what with the thrice-damned earrings. Shikamaru cautiously opened his eyes and peeked over the shoulder of Asuma. Then he heard a low chuckle. So? Finally decided to stop pretending to be asleep, Shika-kun? Asuma asked, giving him an amused grin. Sensei. Troublesome. Shikamaru greeted his teacher with a sigh, looking over his shoulder at the group of ninja around him. The Hokage was traveling at the head of the group, and judging by her pursed lips and rigid posture, she didn't seem pleased by the turn of events. Surrounding her was a contingent of Anbu, and at their rear was a severely depressed-looking Hataka Kakashi. Not that others could tell, Shikamaru thought, the only thing different was that the eccentric Jonin's eyes were droopy and his hands hung rather limply, as if he was forcing himself to walk. At first glance it looked like the man was just sleepy. Gamboling? That was the only word Shikamaru could come up with. Around the depressed Jonin was a hyper man in a green leotard. So that was Mito Guy, the sensei of Team 9. That was interesting. Behind him, Chaoji, who looked relatively unharmed, was carrying a very battered and bloodied Kiba, whose head was flopping listlessly behind him, clearly unconscious. Neji was behind them, looking somewhat battered as well, though he was trying to hide the fact under all the layers of aloof indifference he had around him. He was supporting an exhausted Tenten, who seemed to be favoring her left side. She was also hugging the limp form of Akamaru, whose white fur was matted with blood. Looking around, he noticed a quite obvious absence. "Sensei, where is Naruto?" Shikamaru asked quietly, a pool of apprehension seeping through him. He couldn't be dead. Shikamaru refused to believe that. The blonde genin might not be the best fighter around, but his instincts and endurance were unmatched in their generation. In a true life and death situation, especially against a weaker opponent than what he had faced, Naruto would simply outlast his opponent until he won. Several of the group looked up at the question. From what he observed, none of the genin knew what had happened to Naruto, judging by their worried expressions. In stark contrast, all the jonin tensed. In front of the group, Sanada-sama was clenching her fists, while Kakashi seemed to be even more depressed at the question. For a moment, no one answered. Then Sanada sighed. "Genin Uzumaki has been transported to a safe house after his fight with Uchiha Sasuke due to instability in the current political climate of Konoha," she said shortly, her fists curling on themselves in her ire. It was obvious that it was not something she enjoyed doing. Whatever answer Shikamaru had expected, that was not it. Shikamaru stiffened in surprise, his mind whirring, trying to make sense of the Hokage's cryptic words. Fight with Sasuke? Naruto should have been already in Konoha by now, not fighting Sasuke. But perhaps he was being naive. Knowing Naruto as he did, he knew that he would have rushed into battle again as soon as he finished his current opponent. But that brought a set of questions of their own. He had estimated that Naruto would be able to barely beat the large Sound 4 member, but to defeat him and then go on to fight Sasuke as well meant that Shikamaru had drastically underestimated the skill of the once blonde redhead. And what did the Hokage mean current political climate? That could only mean that the Hokage suspected that Naruto would be in danger inside the village, and the only reason for that at this particular moment. "Hokage-sama, did Naruto kill Sasuke?" Shikamaru asked warily as the genin behind him gasped at the question. Sanada stopped in place, forcing her entourage to stop as well before she turned to stare at Shikamaru. Shikamaru held her gaze unflinchingly. He needed to know what went on in his squad. He was responsible for them in this mission until the Hokage or a Jonin officially relieved him, and they had not done so yet. "You Naras are really too troublesome for your own good," Sanada said finally, looking rather reluctantly impressed. The answer to that question is both yes and no. A strangled gasp came from the genin behind them, so it was news to them as well, Shikamaru thought. Strangely, the thought of Sasuke's death, especially at Naruto's hands, didn't faze him as much as he thought it would. Instead he was remembering something that his father had said to him some time ago. "Remember son, in the shinobi world, the one who shows off the most is the one that gets killed off first." Shikamaru had to stifle a snort at the thought. He wasn't feeling very sympathetic towards Sasuke at the moment. In fact, he was more concerned as to the effect this would have on Naruto, both psychologically and in his interactions with the civilian population of Konoha. After all, he wasn't blind. He knew that for some reason the civilians and a significant amount of the shinobi hated Naruto. He even knew that it had something to do with Kyuubi, though that it needed no intelligence on his part. What else was he supposed to infer when the people called Naruto fox brat and demon interchangeably behind his back? For some reason, he really doubted that killing the renegade Uchiha would improve Naruto's non-existent standing in Konoha. Anyway, what do you mean yes and no, Hokage-sama? Sanada looked past him at the group of genin behind before she gave an exasperated sigh. "Honestly, I don't know why I took this bloody job in the first place," she muttered before she looked up, a contemplative look on her face. "All right, all of you brats, gather around," Sanada yelled at the genin, who flinched before cautiously coming near her. "Now brats, I'm going to tell this just once, and you better listen up. No interruptions, got it?" The assembled genin nodded, cowed. Sanada smirked. "Right. Now as to why I said yes and no, Chunin Shikamaru," she paused, "it's because Naruto didn't kill him per se. He sealed Sasuke within himself, just like the Yondaime sealed the Kyuubi within Naruto." Shizune was silent, deep in thought as she tree-hopped away her way southwards in the Konoha forest. Not that that was in any way out of the norm, with her habit of blending into the background and observing the surroundings quietly. However, the perplexed frown that marred her face would have looked rather out of place on the soft-spoken Jonin to any outside observer. Seeing as there was nobody to notice her lapse, however, Shizune was at peace to ponder over her earlier meeting and try to make sense of the mission that her master had given her. That her master had given her instructions for a solo mission was not unusual. In their travels, Sanada had often given her similarly obscure instructions, though that was mostly in order to evade debt collectors. But even by those standards, this message was unusual. Flashback. Shizune had just corralled the tired genin to the Valley of the End that Sanada had made the rendezvous point. Kiba, with his internal injuries, depleted chakra core and a mild concussion, was completely unconscious and being supported by a clearly reluctant Kakashi. Tenten was walking with a limp, favoring her side where she had taken a rather substantial hit by the Lacan-possessed Kiba, while Neji, noticeably ruffled, was stiffly holding an unconscious Shikamaru up. Chaoji brought up the rear, looking rather lost. When she entered the Valley of the End, the first thing she noticed was the debris. Stone chipped from the statues were scattered far and wide, with occasional kunai amongst them, making the area around the pool resemble a battlefield in the Third Shinobi War. The statues were almost unidentifiable, with scorch marks, craters and gouges from what looked like a large blade littering its surface. The pool's water was slowly regaining its former color, washing away the murky crimson pools of blood in it. On the feet of Madara's statue, near a large pool of brackish blood, stood Sanada and her entourage. Sanada was squatting, examining the blood on the ground with almost religious fervor, something which was both surprising and at the same time not. Yes, she thought, Sanada had come back from her hemophobia with a vengeance. If it continued, she expected Sanada to soon become the world's foremost expert on blood and blood-related diseases. She barely withheld a smirk at the thought. She could just imagine what Orochimaru would think of that. As the genin looked around curiously, Shizune headed over to where Sanada was when Sanada suddenly looked up and beckoned. As she came closer, she soon noticed that the pool of blood was much larger than she had first thought it to be. In fact, there was, by her estimate, at least 2 pints of blood on the ground. Whoever had bled that much must surely be dead or at least in a coma from blood loss. She just didn't know whose it was. Sanada got up as she approached. "Ah. Shizune, good timing, I was going to search for you." Shizune quirked an eyebrow in response, coming closer to her master. Her ponytails were awry and her face looked troubled. Something was troubling her. "Something wrong, Sanada-sama?" At that, Guy. When had he even got here? Stepped forward, his boisterous voice sounding like a foghorn in the subdued crowd. "Ah. Youthful Shizune-san, a most youthful spirit, most unyouthfully spirited, the youthful Naruto-kun." "Guy." Sanada looked livid. "What did I tell you about using that word?" At her words, Guy quailed. Shrinking from the approaching woman, Guy attempted to respond. "Ah. Not to, Sanada-sama?" Sanada's lips curled into a thin smirk as she passed Guy, before her hand snapped forward and hooked itself to Shizune's elbow. Dragging her away, Sanada looked back at Guy. "See that you don't." The last thing Shizune heard was Kakashi lazily saying, "Ma. Ma. Cheer up," before she was bodily pulled into a bush after Sanada. "Hey. Sanada-sama." Before she could continue her indignant scream, a hand snapped over her mouth and she was twisted around to face her teacher, who she was beginning to think had lost her mind. Sanada had a mischievous grin on her face, which made her look that much more deranged in her opinion. Frantically trying to backpedal, Shizune looked at Sanada hesitantly. "Sanada-sama," she repeated, snapping herself out of her blind panic and taking a few deep breaths before continuing. "Why did you do that?" Sanada was apparently immune to the note of accusation in her tone. "Ah, that," she replied aerially. "I just wanted to talk to you in private." She really had to find another method to stop her instinctive retorts, she mused as she contented herself with an incredulous glance at her obviously deranged master. Biting her lip hurt. "Sanada-sama, are you sure you're not sick?" It seemed biting her lip was ineffective as well as painful. Though, to be fair, what she had wanted to say initially had been much more caustic. Oh well, maybe she could just forget this one little indiscretion. It wasn't as if anyone was watching. Though if Sanada's eyes continued to twinkle like that. Sanada was giggling now. "Oh, your face. That was priceless." She stuttered out between her giggles. They dried up quickly enough, however, when Shizune pinned her with a glare. Shizune was getting a bit paranoid herself. Sanada never got this obnoxiously exuberant unless she was trying really hard not to murder someone in cold blood. Or was trying to escape someone after screwing them over. She sweat dropped. Why was she babysitting a woman 20 years her senior anyway? Oh right. Sanada would probably either kill herself or the world if she was not there to curb the wilder side of her character. So maybe she should stop getting so worked up and instead get to the bottom of this particular psychotic fit. "Sanada." That got Sanada's attention, she saw. Shizuna rarely called her anything other than Sanada-sama or the occasional master. What happened? Sanada gave her a scathing look. Fine, she pouted, spoilsport. When Shizuna continued to stare at her unflinchingly though, Sanada began to fidget before holding her hands in front of her. Whoa, Shizuna, I'll tell. Shizuna huffed. You better, or knowing you I'll have to stop you from burning down Konoha. Sanada pouted. I wasn't going to burn down all of it. Be serious, Sanada-sama. Shizuna snapped. She really wasn't in the mood to deal with Sanada's moods right now. Now what did you want me for? Seeing her apprentice wasn't in the mood for her antics seemed to calm Sanada down. Right. I wanted to give you a solo mission, she said, beginning to lay down her instructions. A solo mission? Now? Shizuna interrupted her, surprised at the unusual request. Sanada-sama, what's going on? Sanada exhaled harshly, obviously trying to control her temper. Too much to explain right now, Shizuna, she said after a moment of hesitation. Suffice it to say that I have to go back to Konoha and knock some old heads together. Shizuna could see this was serious, and Sanada would clearly not be deviated from her path. The last time she had seen her so coldly angry had been when Orochimaru had visited them, soon after his defection from Konoha. The Snake Sannin had barely escaped with his life back then. So she did the only thing she could do, get out of the way. What do you want me to do, Sanada-sama? Sanada smiled. Go to the whirlpools and meet a ghost. Huh? As Shizuna stared at her, confused, Sanada's eyes twinkled maddeningly. She was clearly enjoying her confusion. Meet a ghost? You'll know when you see it. That was all Sanada seemed willing to say on the matter. Shizuna sighed. Sometimes her master, for all her maturity, could be incredibly childish, not to mention annoying. I don't want this information to go any further, Sanada continued warningly. By the way, you've got your emergency rations and medical kit, right? Of course, Sanada-sama. She answered, feeling quite insulted. As if she would ever travel without her med kit. Though why would she need it? Sanada-sama. What exactly am I going to be doing after I meet the ghost? Helping a suicidal brat recover from depleted life force, Sanada answered. Honestly, I don't know what I'm going to do with that kid. She continued, grumbling under her breath even as Shizuna gasped. I've got no time to explain any further, and neither do you. Sanada stated, looking at the sun. I'll have to start pretty quickly if I want to stop Danzo marching to Suna. Looking at Shizuna's bugged-out eyes, she muffled a giggle. I'll tell you later, you better go now. If they get inside the village, you'll never find them. Sanada added. Don't worry, I'll send Kitsuyu with the news by tomorrow. End of flashback. Depleted life force. That was something she had not heard mentioned in a long time. Though somewhat similar, life force was unique from chakra in that it was tied to the natural lifespan of an organism. It was also normally unable to be tapped by humans and unrecoverable. Once you use any part of your life force, it was irrecoverably lost. That was the reason survival after its use was almost considered a myth. Life force using jutsu did exist, but those usually were of the suicide technique type, and they used the user's acceptance of death to call up the life force. There were exactly two different methods of accidentally using up life force, sealing techniques and chakra exhaustion. And seeing as Naruto was the bearer of a unique seal and had been in consecutive fights for almost a day, it could be either. Personally, she hoped it was the seal. Depleted life force on top of the normal chakra exhaustion usually caused irreversible damage to the victim's chakra network. When she almost missed her step on a branch, she refocused on her traveling. It was no use speculating on her patient's state until she got there. As Sanada always said, she would get there, do her best, and hope that it was enough. She could only try to get there as fast as possible. She didn't want the child that had managed to worm his way into Tsunada's cold heart to die. 4 hours later, Shizuna had finally caught up to the source of the strangely light footsteps she had been following. For a moment, she stuttered on her step, unsure of what she was seeing. Sure, Sanada had said she was going to meet a ghost, but she had figured her master was speaking figuratively. What she was watching, however, was making her instinctively search her chakra for any sign of a genjutsu. For surely there couldn't be a figure, only discernible through slight deflection in the light patterns, carrying Naruto on its back. It wasn't even an invisibility cloaking jutsu like Sanada's teammate Jiraiya was rumored to have developed, because she could feel the chakra of the strange being carrying Naruto. The very chakra of the ghost, as Sanada had called it, seemed somehow out of phase with reality, with a strange ethereal quality. In spite of this though, Shizuna knew that the figure was corporeal. The indents it was leaving in the tree bark were real enough, though they did seem rather light for a grown person. Hello, Shizuna-san. Enjoying the view? A voice crooned in her ear. Stifling her shriek through years of kunoichi training, she twisted around to come face to face with the person she had been trailing, only she. For the figure was obviously a woman. Was quite more material than the one she had been trailing, with her body actually reflecting some color. Though, to be fair, it still looked more like stained glass than an actual human being. And her face was mere inches away from her. Instinctively, with reflexes honed by a lifetime as a shinobi, she lashed out with a senbon at the figure's exposed neck, only for her hand to be caught in a vice-like grip just when it was about to pierce the jugular of her assailant. Now that was very rude, Shizuna-san. What has that granddaughter of mine been teaching you? Granddaughter? The ghost woman smiled thinly. Indeed. Turning back, she crouched, getting ready to travel again. I assume Sanada sent you? Yes, ma'am. Call me Mito. Come along. With that, Mito spun around and leapt back into the trees. Shizune, who was following her, was feeling incredibly out of her depth. Of course she knew who Mito Senju was. The wife of the Shodaime had been the one to design many of the medical seals that Konoha General Hospital used to this very day. But she also knew that Mito was supposed to have died around the time she was born, probably even before Jiraiya took the Yondaime as his apprentice. But this specter certainly resembled the few portraits of Mito Senju that had survived to this day in the now abandoned Senju clan home. It was undoubtedly who she was claiming to be. There was no way Sanada could mistake the figure of her grandmother after all, and the thought that Sanada, who had studied illusions and concealment jutsu for over a decade, could be fooled by an impostor was ludicrous. Shizuna pondered the power of the woman Kunoichi who she was following. Whatever her body was, the power exuding off her figure was palpable. It wasn't chakra pressure like the Sandaime, Jiraiya, or even Sanada exuded, and it wasn't even killing intent like Orochimaru. It was simply grace. The woman moved with a quiet self-assurance that was present in only the most seasoned of warriors, every muscle movement choreographed like an elegant dance. However, in stark contrast to the bloodier kunoichi such as Anko or Tsume, the aura surrounding the woman did not make her seem threatening. Instead, the woman made you feel inadequate. It was like she had an aura of royalty surrounding her. Though the fact that she was following the supposedly dead but apparently alive wife of the Shodaime did nothing to calm her nerves. She really didn't like going into a situation blindly. Though she seemed to be doing that quite often lately, Shizuna thought somewhat sourly as she stared at the back of Mito. The stately woman had not graced her with a single glance, let alone a word, since the original greeting. Instead, the woman, who had become invisible once more, was steadily tree-hopping her way to the Uzoshiogakure ruins, cradling the unconscious Naruto to her chest. You know, if you want to ask something, you should talk instead to staring at me. Mito's dry voice cut through her thoughts. Shaken out of her contemplation, Shizuna refocused on Mito, who had not even turned her head. Had she really been that obvious? Shizuna paused, unsure how to delicately approach the subject of her non-death. Mito's lips were twitching, even as her pace slowed as she came abreast of the embarrassed Hokage's assistant. Why aren't you dead? That's what you were going to ask, right? Humor was lacing her words, somehow making the regal woman somehow more approachable than before. Shizuna flushed in mortification. No, ma'am. Mito gave her an indulgent smile. Don't be embarrassed, she said soothingly. I would have been more surprised if a medical professional like yourself did not question me on my apparent lack of mortality. Turning to look Shizuna in the eye, Mito proceeded to glare at her. And I thought I told you to call me Mito. Shizuna blushed further. Sorry, Mito-sama. Mito sighed before she gave Shizuna a flat look. You really are a skittish thing, aren't you? She asked jokingly before breaking out in a sudden smile. The change that the smile wrought on her face was incredible, Shizuna thought. Where before she had looked every bit the stateswoman, all refined expressions, emotionless face and calculating eyes, she now looked beautiful, even if the shadows behind her eyes told her that the woman had seen things in her life she could never completely forget. And to answer your question, I'm not currently dead because I'm not currently alive. Having given that extremely cryptic answer, Mito smiled at her before tree-hopping ahead again. The conversation was clearly over, yet Shizuna couldn't help staring at her retreating back, even as she accelerated her own pace in order to keep up. At least now she knew where Sanada had got her love for cryptic statements from. When Sanada's group finally reached the great gates of Konoha, what they saw was a ghost town. The streets were deserted, the few people in the streets scurrying with their head down. Sanada looked around the village dispassionately. She had half expected this to happen. She really should have left somebody who could be trusted to not to start off the Fourth Shinobi War, but the fact remained that she had really not had the time to houseclean yet. Though if nothing else, this provided her with the necessary leverage to oust the old farts that had entrenched themselves in all the higher administrative posts. And if she had any say in it, Danzo would be the first to go. That man was dangerous. This is it, brats. Sonata stopped in the middle of the street, where the road split into three, with one fork going to the residential districts, one to the outer districts, and the third to the administrative district, which housed the Hokage Tower, as well as Konoha General Hospital. Now all of you are to report to the hospital, she continued, her gimlet gaze resting on both Shikamaru and Kibble longer than on the others. The genin singled out slumped before they reluctantly began their march to the hospital. Ignoring their pleading expressions and conveniently forgetting that she too had hated hospitals at that age, Sonata turned towards the Anbu who had been standing silently behind her. Tiger, Rabbit, head to the barracks and report to the captain. I'll take it from here. With a mumbled Sonata-sama, the Anbu shunshined away in a swirl of leaves. Finally, and somewhat reluctantly, Sonata turned towards the final group with her. Guy, Asuma, come with me to the meeting, she said tiredly before turning around and walking towards the Hokage Tower. Might as well deal with the fossils now, she muttered under her breath, even as Guy and Asuma fell into step behind her. Sonata-sama? Hearing her name called out, Sonata looked back. Truthfully, she had half expected this. Yes, Kakashi? The one-eyed shinobi had clearly seen better days. His one exposed eye was droopy and lifeless, and his attire was uncharacteristically rumpled. If that wasn't enough evidence, he was slumped in on himself piteously, looking utterly defeated. Still, the man's mental strength was admirable. Straightening up and looking Sonata in the eye, Kakashi was obviously trying to play off his mental state as inconsequential. Sonata-sama, his lone visible eye crinkled in his trademark smile. Wouldn't it be better if I came along too? Sonata's face softened as she slowly walked towards Kakashi. The cycloptic jonin warily took a step back, but before he could retreat any further his shoulder was caught in a vice-like grip, and Sonata's face was looming over his. Kakashi. You're currently not in a fit mood to plant a tree, let alone face those old fossils. Even through his depressed mood, Kakashi couldn't help sweat-dropping at the blunt statement. Though the statement was as subtle as a sledgehammer to the face, Sonata's tone had been soft, almost motherly. It was a welcome relief from what he had actually expected, which was another dressing down. After all, saying that Kakashi was currently not in Sonata's good graces would be an understatement. He had hardly had any time to relax, however, when Sonata's fist descended onto his face with all the force of a real sledgehammer. Caught off guard, Kakashi caught the blow full in the face, resulting in him being thrown off his feet and into the ground, where he landed in a moaning heap of flesh. Smiling triumphantly, Sonata brushed off her hands. Guy, can you have Kakashi over for the day? Though the statement was worded as a question, the jonin wearing the green leotard recognized it for what it was. Of course, Sonata-sama. Excellent. Beaming, Sonata turned back to Kakashi, who was just getting back to his feet. Now, go to Guy's house and stay there until tomorrow morning, she ordered Kakashi, who stared back at her with his slack jaw visible even through his cloth mask. Though he still shrunk into himself when a predatory smirk stole across her face. At 10 a.m. tomorrow, you will report to the Yamanaka-Isen ward in Konoha General. If you're late, I will issue mandatory taijutsu practice for you with Guy. Understood? By now, Kakashi was nodding his head so fast he resembled a bobblehead. Yes, of course, Sonata-sama. Grinning from ear to ear, Sonata turned to leave. And Kakashi? That punch was for acting like a wet blanket. You won't act like a wet blanket again, will you? No, Sonata-sama. Humph, we'll see. With that, she turned to the dumbfounded Asuma and Guy. Well, what are you waiting for? Come on, we've got a bunch of old farts to dismember. As she strolled down the street without looking back, her words floated back to the petrified pair. I have a good feeling about this. Asuma looked at Guy. Guy looked at Asuma. Simultaneously deciding to ignore that it had happened at all, the two fell into step behind their Hokage, who was now whistling a funeral march. Behind them, Kakashi stared at their backs, a shell-shocked look on his face. Naruto woke up to the gentle caress of a soft hand running through his hair. It took all the strength he had to stop a groan of discomfort. His whole body hurt with a dull bone-deep ache that permeated every cell of his body. Wearily opening his eyes, he was immediately assaulted by an acute piercing headache. Disorientated, it was quite some time before he could bear opening his eyes again. When he finally managed it, he found that he was in some sort of open circular chamber that only had the futon he currently occupying and a few scattered chairs in it. The walls were painted a faded yellow, and from the few strange slit windows in the walls let in streams of soft morning sunlight. For a moment he was lost in thought, thinking about what had happened. Though some parts of it were obscured and muffled, no doubt due to the influence of the Kyuubi chakra, some parts stood out starkly. Staring up at the impaled figure of Jirabu, blood dripping down the chains onto his face. Whirring chain links cutting into the exposed body of Kimi Maro, agonized screams echoing in his ears. Staring at the aftermath of his jutsu, looking blankly at the blob of pink flesh that was once a person. Rasengan whirring, drilling into the shoulder of Sasuke as he screamed. Looking on, unbelieving, as Sasuke fell back, blood spewing from the stump of his arm. An inhuman face surrounded by a shock of white hair looming over him. Shuddering, Naruto turned his head, his hair brushing against his strangely soft pillow, as looked at the person currently running their hand through his hair, hoping for something to distract him. All thoughts of falling back asleep had faded by now. Even if it wasn't for the pain that permeated his body, he wasn't sure he would be able to face the nightmares if he fell asleep now. Looking up, he found the still form of Mito, only the gentle rise and fall of her chest and the hand brushing his hair, marring her perfect stillness. Mito was resting against the foot of an old battered wooden chair, her head flung back and holding Naruto's head in what Naruto suddenly realized was her lap. The mouth was slightly curved in a gentle smile, and her eyes were slightly glazed. All in all, she looked to be at peace, far more than Naruto had ever seen her. For a while, Naruto simply stared at the relaxed figure of Mito, basking in the contentment of the moment. Then the hand-running furrows through his hair suddenly stopped, and Mito looked down into Naruto's eyes, a soft smile on her face. "Hello, there, Naruto-kun." Naruto gently coughed to clear his throat. "Hello, ghost lady," he rasped, before giving the strange room an exaggerated glance. "Where are we?" Mito's smile widened, looking somewhat between melancholy and deliriously happy. "Naruto-kun," she paused, gesturing widely with the hand not lying on his head, "welcome to Uzoshiogakure." End of Chapter 10. Chapter 11. Aftershocks. Naruto had finally escaped Mito after what had felt like hours of insistent and highly irritating prodding by her. Now, after finally escaping her frankly unsettling impersonation of a mother hen, Naruto was standing on a half-ruined rampart, staring down at the unique architecture of Uzoshiogakure with clouded eyes and thinking back to what Mito had told him of the reasons for his relocation to the Uzumaki ancestral land. Looking at the ruins of what could have, in another lifetime, been his home, Naruto felt a melancholy steal across his very being. Naruto had never been one to brood excessively, and he had never complained about his lot in life. Still, that did not stop the feeling that his life would have been much better had his kin, the Uzumaki whose lifeblood permeated the very soil of this ancient land, had survived. He had not expected more out of the people in Konoha. He knew that his presence was both unwanted and unwelcome to the general populace. And he knew that his popularity would only further plummet after they heard of his removal of the Uchiha, expected it even. But this was not the blind fury at the loss of an idol at his hands that he would allow to disperse. This was the reopening of old wounds. And even more appalling to him, it was urging Konoha to war by the demonizing of the Jinchuriki and Gaara. Gaara, he felt, deserved better. The boy had been molded by the demonization of his own village, and he deserved the chance to make his amends and rebuild the bridges that had been burnt between him and his family, not to be used as a linchpin to further the ambitions of a war hawk. To use their hatred for him to persuade them to go to war. That was unforgivable. However long it took, Naruto would find a way to get even with this Shimura Danzo. He would not have the deaths of thousands of people on his head, for it was Konoha's hatred of him that they were transferring onto Naruto. The only people in Konoha to ever be able to hold a legitimate grudge against Gaara were Lee, Sakura and him. Other than that, the only damage Gaara had ever done to Konoha was to destroy about a square mile of woodland. A cool breeze was flowing, salty with the proximity to the sea and invigorating with its chilly wetness. The calm felt overwhelming. He supposed that he had not yet settled into his routine from the nerve-wracking ordeal that had been his last mission. Though, he thought cynically, in a certain sense, he was still in the mission, seeing as he had yet to step foot in Konoha and get debriefed. A sardonic grin came to his face as he considered his position, his eyes staring blankly at the distant cliffs. It surely had to be unique. He had certainly never heard of someone who had to be protected from being lynched by a mob for the successful completion of a mission. He sighed. He would face what came when it did, and Ba-chan probably had everything under control already. No, this was not the time to act rashly or to lash out at everybody. His own standing was too precarious for that, and he had no desire to destroy Konoha at the roots. No, this was the time to fortify, to train, to find the lay of the land as Iruka-sensei used to say, and he had no intention of prematurely showing his hand to the public and giving his opponents a chance to see him out of Konoha. Whatever happened, he would see his way to the Hokage seat and he would rule over those that tried to trample him. Naruto could see no other revenge that could so poetically satisfy him than that. A cry of a lone seagull far away in the distance brought him out of his reverie, and as he looked at the source of the cry that was just a speck in the sky, he, for the first time since he had arrived in this lone deserted relic of his clan's bygone days, saw the serene beauty of the island of Yuzu and the regal town that his ancestors had built upon it. Uzushiogakure, bathed as it was in tepid morning light, had an unearthly feeling of surrealism about it. The dull sunlight shone off the faded red spirals etched in the toppled stone columns that dominated the central village. And outside the immediate village walls lay the greater expanse of the Yuzu Island in all its glory. The Yuzu Island, which he had noticed in his geography lessons as the one island every geography teacher had skipped over, was elliptical in shape. On one end, where he was now, was a vast plain that melded into the steep cliffs that faced the rough seas surrounding them. This was what the Uzumaki clan of old had turned into their refuge, building their vast fortress city in the wide fertile plains, hemmed in by the untraversable sea. On the other side, casting an immense shadow over the human settlement below it, was a huge extinct volcano that was now overgrown in lush grasslands, with occasional patches of heavy brush dotting the slope. Halfway up the volcano, squarely facing the village and shaped like a giant five-point cross with curved arms and with a circular structure in the center, and it was the oldest surviving building known to be created by the Uzumaki. It was one of the most sacred landmarks of the clan, the Uzumaki ritual chamber. From what Ghost Lady had told him, the ritual chamber was the place where the larger seals, which often required more than one participant, were activated. Said to be protected by fuinjutsu formulae so ancient that even the Uzumaki clan considered them legend, the ritual chamber was one of the only buildings, the other being the clan leader's office where he was residing now, to escape damage in the vicious sacking of the Uzumaki homeland. Only an Uzumaki by blood or a person with express willing permission from an Uzumaki and a lack of intent to harm the Uzumaki could enter the ritual chamber. Sadly, the Uzumaki had been so caught off guard that none could retreat to the structure before the opposing armies had formed a perimeter around the building. Looking at the sprawling structure, he made a note to explore it sometime soon. He couldn't wait to analyze the obscure seals that, according to Mito, absolutely littered the walls of the structure. It had not occurred to him before, Naruto realized as he stared at his surroundings curiously, how much he had missed having a home he could belong to. For while the buildings surrounding him were mostly ruins, some still blackened, crushed or otherwise marked by the genocide that had occurred here almost half a century ago, and the buildings that did survive were made in a strange amalgam of Corinthian columns and domed roofs. Just looking at the vast expanse before him brought him a sense of acceptance that he had missed for so long. A puff of smoke. Chakra smoke, he recognized its unique texture. Escaping from the, as far as he knew, abandoned ritual chamber made him look up with a start. Startled, half-formed thoughts started to fill his mind as he stared at the slowly dispersing smoke in panic. It couldn't be Mito. That much he knew. When he had last left her, she had been preparing to go to sleep, and anyway, the positioning of the office space they were using as a home made it impossible for anyone, even if they were translucent like Mito preferred to be, to cross over to the structure without being noticed by Naruto. That left an outsider, somebody inside one of the most sacred buildings to the Uzumaki no less. Or… Here Naruto's heart clenched. It could be an Uzumaki, some long-lost relation of his that had miraculously escaped the purge. No, he wouldn't get his hopes up in vain. For now he would assume that the person inside the ritual chamber was not supposed to be there. Seeing as he was loath to wake Mito for this, it meant that he was going to have to face this threat by himself. As he leapt off the rampart and stealthily made his way up the mountainside, he felt a smirk creeping up his face. He really wouldn't have it any other way. After all, what better way to measure his recovery than another fight? The first thing Naruto noticed as he stealthily snuck into the central hall of the ritual chamber was the water. Relatively still and slowly draining from several cutouts in the floor near the walls of the building that were presumably used in its heyday to wash away the giant inked seals from the floor, was a layer of water that was about ankle deep. So far as he walked through the southernmost spoke of the ancient structure, everything had been as normal as could be expected from a structure that was predominantly used for sealing. Old, worn walls, made of grainy light-colored stone that was superimposed with seals that permeated the very structure of the stone, dominated the building. In a trough in the center was a strange mound of loose earth, cycling through every species of earth Naruto had seen, and a fair few that he hadn't, running the length of the spoke of the star. He could swear that there had been gold ore at one point. At the end of the spoke, however, where a narrow open doorway with hefty stone doors of the same light gray stone of the walls led into the main central hall, was a stationary wall of water that seemed unable to flow past the inner boundary of the room. Instead, it curled around itself, forming a pulsing liquid bubble that contained the water within the central chamber. Gingerly testing his footing, Naruto stepped onto the water layer, trying to utilize water walking. The water, somewhat to his surprise, did exactly as he expected it to and held his weight. So the water was not some sort of last defense of the building. That had to mean that this water was somehow a creation of the intruder. Now more wary than ever before, Naruto slowly tiptoed towards the very center of the chamber, being careful not to disturb the water too much. It was a useless precaution if the water layer was the base for a sensory jutsu, but he did not want to tempt his somewhat unstable luck by splashing around. However, as soon as he reached the very center of the room, he had to stifle a gasp. From his current position, he could see down each of the doors leading to the spoke-like protrusions in the odd-shaped building, and the grandeur of the sight and realization of exactly what it was almost enough to make him forget why he came here in the first place. At first glance, all the spokes were relatively identical. Stone doors opening up to long curving corridors of light-colored stone, with a large trough running along the length until the corridor curved out sight. It was what was contained in the troughs, however, that had him gaping. While the one he had traversed had contained soil. No, earth, he corrected himself. The others had very different contents. The one to the right of the one had come through seemed to be empty at first glance, though when he stared closer, it seemed to contain some sort of gas that was denser than air, judging from the way distorted the light passing through it. However, what caught his attention was the way small bluish sparks of electricity, lightning, arced throughout the strange cloud. The one next to it was somewhat smoky. Continuous gouts of steamy smoke, wind, bellowed from what appeared to be vents at the bottom of the trough, swirling in an ever-moving cloud of steam and smoke. To his left was a pool, water, stretching into the distance and obscured by clouds of steam. Naruto had a sneaking suspicion that at least one of the clouds would be fog instead steam if the water spoke followed the theme of the earth one. It was also obviously disturbed, which Naruto guessed was not its natural state. Well, that at least answered where the water flooding the central chamber had come from. Finally, between water and wind was perhaps the most astonishing sight of it all. The trough was filled to the brim with lava, churning restlessly and letting off great plumes of flame. Fire. In the distance he could see a patch of asphalt, burning steadily and letting off gouts of pitch-black smoke. What sounded suspiciously like a girlish giggle brought Naruto out of his trance at the sight of the giant elemental wheel, for that was what it obviously was, that surrounded the Uzumaki ritual chamber. Carefully tiptoeing to the door and poking his head inside the water spoke, he again heard the same girlish giggle echoing in the stone corridor. He slowly sneaked into the corridor, creeping forward into the mist, following the source of the continuous waves that flowed from whoever was in the corridor. Suddenly, through the mist blanketing the corridor, Naruto noticed the silhouette of a small humanoid shape, leaning against what looked like a giant boulder and seemingly half submerged in the water. Naruto's reflexes flared, leftover instincts from his multiple back-to-back battles. In an instant, a kunai was in his hand as he shot forward in a chakra-enhanced leap. As the target came into view through the mist, Naruto barely had time to notice a pair of dark female eyes, wide open in surprise, before he was on her, kunai flashing in an arc towards her unprotected throat. There was a whizzing sound of displaced air as something snapped past his face towards him, and then Naruto's eyes, which had been narrowed in concentration, snapped open in surprise. A small hand slammed into his kunai-wielding wrist, while another folded his elbow inwards. His other hand was caught in an iron grip, pulling him towards his assailant. Caught off guard, Naruto's own momentum carried him forward onto his own kunai until he jerked abruptly to a halt, teetering on the edge of the trough with his kunai tracing a fine crimson line across his own throat. For a moment Naruto stilled, the face of Naruto's opponent still obscured by the remnants of the mist, as he found himself in a rather embarrassing position, completely at the mercy of his enemy. The two hands holding his own were petite, soft, pale, well-manicured and utterly feminine, but wrapping around his wrists in an unexpectedly strong grip. A stray drop of water slowly eked its way down the hand holding his own kunai to his throat, finally dripping off the elbow. Naruto gulped at the sight, trying to ignore it to look at his silent captor's face, while the kunai dug even further into his throat at the attempt. A fine trickle of blood ran down his throat, which was ignored by him in favor of trying to get a view of his captor, whose face was still obscured by the remnants of mist hanging between them. A sudden panic gripped him. He did not want to die here, not now when he had so much to do. But the kunai digging into his throat deterred any thoughts of escape. High regeneration or not, he was not willing to bet his life on the chance that the Kyuubi could reattach a severed head. He couldn't even use chakra, seeing as any further strain, according to the ghost lady, could cripple his chakra network completely. It was after what had seemed like a lifetime when he heard a feminine sigh. Then the kunai slackened around his neck. "Really, Naruto-kun," his captor's soft-spoken voice. He knew that voice, but where? Asked with obvious exasperation, "What were you doing? You were supposed to be in bed." And then he was released. Naruto flailed around for a moment before he regained his balance, before he settled into a wary stance, still not recognizing the voice. Though, he thought, puzzled, he had heard that voice before, somewhere. Then two arms emerged from the fog in front of him before his assailant pulled herself out of the water as the fog started to dissipate, revealing Shizune and an enormous blue and white slug. Naruto's mind stuttered to a halt before he started blushing furiously. Looking back at him was a vaguely Pixie-ish face, young and graceful, framed by dark hair that now stuck wetly to her face. Large sparkling doe-like eyes staring at him with a mixture of fondness and exasperation. A lone water drop trickled down her delicate neck. Naruto-kun, are you alright?" Shizune stepped forward, looking worriedly at the weeping cut from his kunai, but he couldn't respond, trying as he was to understand the view before him. By now, he could feel his face heating up in an overwhelming blush. The world was spinning around him as he stared at the Hokage's apprentice, unable to tear his eyes away. That teasing drop of water trailed its way down, leaving a glistening trail on her pale skin. With a sound halfway between a sigh and a snort, Naruto pitched forward, falling into the pool with a perverse grin on his face. Panicking, Shizune hurriedly grabbed the unconscious Naruto and hauled him out of the water. "I didn't hurt him that bad, did I, Kitsayu-sama?" she asked the bemused slug beside her frantically, running a diagnostic jutsu on the unconscious red-headed genin. Kitsayu groaned, slapping one of her longer eye stalks to her face in a parody of a facepalm. Shizune turned to her, confused. "There's nothing wrong with the boy, Shizune-san." The slug's voice was dry, but a hint of amusement laced it, further confusing the brunette. Shizune became even more flustered. "What do you mean, Kitsayu-sama? Naruto-kun just fainted for no reason. He must be hurt." Kitsayu snorted. "Look at yourself, Shizune-san," she said, laughter in her tone. "All that's wrong with that boy is that he's male." "What do you mean, Kitsayu-sama? Just look at yourself." Puzzled, Shizune looked down and then froze, a furious blush blooming on her face. A moment later, a shrill scream echoed through the chamber. "Aieeeee. I told you it was a bad idea to take a bath here," Kitsayu said dryly, rolling her eye stalks at the Hokage's apprentice as she shrunk into the water, blushing in embarrassment. Naruto stared at the air a foot above Shizune's right shoulder, trying not to blush. Shizune was resolutely looking down, submerged to her chin in the icy water and blushing up a storm. On the other side of the wide trough, Kitsayu seemed to be enjoying their predicament. The whole situation was awkward in the extreme, Naruto thought as he sneaked another glance at the Hokage's apprentice. Shizune-chan," he started tentatively. Shizune sunk further into the pool, her blush intensifying. "Can we pretend this never happened, Dadabeo?" Shizune groaned, mortified, as Kitsayu chuckled from the other side of the trough. "Okay, Naruto-kun," she squeaked out, relieved. "This never happened." Kitsayu interrupted them, a teasing note in her voice. "Oh, I don't know about that, Shizune-san. By the way, Sanada-sama told me to tell you that she'd better not have any grandkids anytime soon." Naruto choked, even as Shizune gave Kitsayu a wounded look. "Why did you tell Sanada-sama?" Kitsayu giggled, and Naruto finally found his voice. "Ba-chan? Ba-chan knows?" he asked, horrified. The giant slug grinned, her eyes glinting mischievously. Naruto groaned. "She's never going to let me live that down, is she?" he asked Shizune, who nodded her head morosely. "Naruto, I'm doomed." A demure giggle from Kitsayu distracted Naruto's attention from his own imminent death via humiliation. Scowling at the giggling slug, he muttered petulantly, yeah, laugh it up." Halfway through his grumbling, he paused suddenly as a thought struck him. How did you tell Ba-chan, Dadabeo?" Kitsayu, who was idly waving an eye stalk as she watched the humorous byplay, stopped giggling, looking puzzled. "I just told her, young Naruto-kun. I can talk, you know. But you're here now, so you can't be telling her now." Naruto elaborated, in a manner befitting someone teaching a grown-up that yes, 1 and 1 did equal 2. Kitsayu reared up in the water, insulted by Naruto's insinuation. "I don't need to explain my magnificent abilities to a rude child like you," she huffed indignantly, pinning Naruto with a glare. Naruto inwardly quailed, why did he always end up angering giant animals? He would have thought that facing Orochimaru's snake summons, Gamabunta and the Ichibi no Shukaku, would have been enough for one lifetime. Trying to act nonchalant, Naruto slowly retreated away from the towering summon when he bumped into somebody behind him. Turning around, he came face to face with Shizune, who had a forced smile on her face. Naruto gulped. He knew that type of smile, though he couldn't tell for the life of him what he had done to deserve it. She can tell Tsunade-sama what's going on because she's Tsunade-sama's summon, Naruto-kun. She can send a clone of herself to Tsunade-sama. Shizune spoke softly as she always did, but the hint of steel in her tone let him know for certain that he had done something to earn her ire. Shaking off thoughts of possible death via Hokage's apprentice off, Naruto looked inquisitively at the giant slug, only to swiftly turn back at the forbidding expression on the giant summon's face. He had never even known that a giant slug could frown like that. He knew that summons could do jutsu, but still a summon that could create clones seemed like a useful ability. He would know, after all, he was probably the person who used clones most often in all of Konoha. However, Shizune continued, narrowing her eyes at Naruto, bringing him out of his thoughts with a start. I don't you talking to Kotsuyu-sama like that. Naruto looked at her, eyebrows furrowing in confusion. He hadn't said anything else to make her mad, had he? Then a part of what she had said earlier finally trickled through his mind, and all thoughts of his supposed folly flew out of his mind. Heh? Naruto exclaimed, advancing on a somewhat unnerved Kotsuyu with a maniacal gleam in his eyes, former trepidation forgotten. You're Bachan's summon Kotsuyu? No way. I saw her before, she's way larger than you are. I am Kotsuyu, Naruto-san, Kotsuyu stammered, shocked enough by the sudden turnaround in the redhead's behavior to lose her composure, and thus her frown. Edging away from his face, which was almost touching hers as he examined her, she tried pleading her mistress's apprentice for help. However, she found Shizune leaning back in the water, muffling her giggles as she watched the giant slug slowly retreat from the insane redhead, looking for all the world like a man backing off from a snake. Naruto-san. Can you back away a bit? Nah. He tilted his head to his side inquisitively, completely ignoring her request. He was now examining one of Kotsuyu's eye stalks. What are you doing here anyway, Databeo? I summoned her, Naruto-kun. Shizune said seriously. She was just acting as a medium for me to communicate with Tsunade-sama. Oh. For a moment, he stared at her blankly. All of a sudden, his frivolity seemed inconsequential, feeling very much flat. Naruto slowly settled back into the water, staring intently at Shizune, waiting for her to continue. Instead of saying any further though, Shizune merely gestured to Kotsuyu. The slug huffed before it literally split before his eyes, and a miniature version of the slug split itself from main body and headed towards Naruto, climbing up his torso and settling on his shoulder. Naruto stared at the miniature slug in apprehension. Of course, the term miniature was relative. This slug clone was infinitesimally smaller than the behemoth that Tsunade had summoned against Orochimaru, but it was nonetheless at least as long as those giant blood-sucking leeches in the Forest of Death. Then the slug spoke in Tsunade's voice. Hey there, brat. What is this I hear of you peeking on Shizune? Naruto stared at the slug in horror, spluttering, as Shizune squealed in embarrassment and Kotsuyu giggled in the background. Ba-chan. He gasped, finally finding his voice. A boisterous giggle answered him before Tsunade responded, her voice teasing. Just kidding, brat. If you were really peeping, grandmother would beat you up before I could. Naruto couldn't help but notice she seemed inordinately pleased at the fact. Yeah, old hag, laugh it up, he grumbled, but there was no heat in his retort. The exchange of insults was just another part of the routine between them. Sure enough, Tsunade replied as he expected. Don't call me old, you brat. I call him as I see him, Ba-chan. That little genjutsu isn't fooling me, Databeo. He taunted Tsunade, a grin tugging at his lips, before his mood plummeted as he remembered exactly why he was talking to Tsunade. As much fun as it was, Naruto was still uneasy about the potential news from Konoha. Interrupting the expected roar of insulted pride from his Hokage, Naruto slid into his rarely seen serious mood. Ba-chan, what is happening in Konoha? A gusty sigh answered him. The long night was what happened, brat. If it wasn't for the sake I would have probably come over there and killed you myself. Naruto's mouth twitched at Tsunade's quip, but he soldiered on. He really was going to go mad with anticipation if he didn't know what was going on. Jokes aside, Ba-chan, what really happened? Is Konoha still going to war with Suna? Cause if it is, I'm coming to Konoha and kicking some arse, no matter what you say. And that's exactly why you're not coming back now, brat. Sanada snapped at him. "I've got enough trouble in here trying to control the sheep without you trying to blow holes in it with your chains." Sighing, she continued in a more subdued tone. "Frankly, brat, it's been utter chaos in here for the last few hours, and the Anbu patrols are still cleaning up the mess." Naruto's eyebrows shot up at that. The Anbu were never called in to settle a political dispute because they were not supposed to have any say in politics at all. Even the presence of the Anbu commander in the Konoha Council was to give the Hokage an inlet into the workings of the lower administrative body. In fact, upon entering Anbu, the shinobi in question had to give up all clan positions, clan memberships or any other civic position in Konoha and dedicate their whole life in the posted time period to the whims of the Hokage, as long as the Hokage is not blatantly traitorous. And even then it was a fine line, with any act potentially treasonous. For the Anbu to be called in, Naruto thought worriedly, there must have either been a direct threat at Sanada herself or an enemy threatening Konoha. "Anbu?" he asked, confused. "Why would you need Anbu?" Another sigh came over the line. "Well, I suppose I'd better tell you what happened from the beginning, Naruto." Sanada's voice sounded resigned coming out of the slug. Flashback. There was, Sanada thought as she walked down the cavernous corridors leading to the Konoha Council chambers, a certain irony in the way the things had come around full circle. Her grandfather, the founder of Konoha, had been the one to set up the Konoha Council as part of his system of power checks to prevent a Hokage from straying from the narrow path. It had lost power during the exacting rule of the Nidaime, who suffered no fools, and regained power during the rule of the peace-loving Sandaime, her teacher. It had almost been dissolved during the short reign of the charismatic fourth and his radical views on what was acceptable for a shinobi, which the council, even then led by Danzo, had vehemently opposed. When a tired Sandaime had been reinstated after the Kyuubi disaster, however, the council, which had been on its last legs with the restrictions the fourth had imposed, struck back with a vengeance, acquiring a power base that, by the time she took the reins, had all but eclipsed her own. In a way, what had once been a tool to prevent excess authority in one person had itself acquired more power than necessary and was now threatening the great tree that was Konoha. So yes, it was ironic that an institution whose sole purpose had been to be a power check for a de facto dictator would have to be dissolved, not because of a dictatorial Hokage forcibly taking power, but because the council had become the very thing it had been built to oppose. And she, Senjutsu Sanada, was no weak leader who stood by and let things happen just because she was new to the job. There had been a reason, after all, why she had been recalled from almost a decade of what had essentially been desertion. She had no illusions about that. It had been desertion. And offered the position of Hokage. From the corner of her eyes, she watched the Jonin behind her as they jogged behind her as she strode along the long wooden corridor towards the large oaken door that barred the path to the council. For a moment, she was distracted by the urgency in their movements, straining to catch up to her. Really, what was ninja training coming to? When she was their age, and even now, this was a comfortable, relaxing pace. Shaking her head, she refocused on the present. She would have time to ponder the declining standards later. She narrowed her eyes at the thought of the coming conflict, for conflict there was going to be. That mummified relic was not someone to be easily dissuaded from their path. Asuma was slouched, and at first glance he looked as bored and utterly unconcerned with what was happening around him as he normally did, but closer scrutiny revealed the fact that his cigarette was unlit, simply dangling limply from his lips, as if he had forgotten he had it. In addition, his eyes were darting across their surroundings, taking in every single detail and processing it in an instant. Sanada chuckled to herself, that boy was sometimes more analytical than Inara. On the other side, however, was the real object of her thoughts. Mito Gai, resident taijutsu master of Konoha and self-proclaimed green beast, and a man who was one of the most intelligent men in Konoha, while also being the most eccentric. And that was not a title to take lightly in a ninja village, especially one as open-minded as Konoha, being abound with oddities such as Jiraiya, Anko, Genma, and Kakashi. That was not to say that she didn't have her own little quirks, because all higher-ranked ninja had them. She was just concerned because after Jiraiya, who was iffy at best and unreliable at worst, Mito Gai was the next prospect for Hokage, seeing as Kakashi was out of the question, and Kurenai, the only other prospect with the proper temperament and drive, was way too naive for the job. And that thought was unsettling. Gai as Hokage? The mind boggled. It was with a bit of a start that she noticed that she was in front of the council chambers. Through the solid door, she could already hear the heated debate that was going on inside. Inwardly, she smirked. It was showtime. Slamming the broad oak doors as she strode into the chamber, chakra writhing around her frame like a contained storm of power, Sanada knew she cut an impressive figure as she stared into the faces of the council members, stalking past them to her seat. Her instinct was telling her whatever followed from this meeting would be pivotal in their future endeavors, and she hadn't got this far by ignoring her instincts. The council chamber in Konoha was a vast structure, dating back to the reign of the Shodaime, and lined with privacy and anti-eavesdropping seals of Mito Senju's own design. Towards the center of the room, facing the reinforced entrance was a skewed horseshoe-shaped table that seated all its members, the longer right wing containing the clan heads, department heads and clanless ninja representatives, the left wing containing civilian representatives and the retired ninja group's representatives who were considered a lower part of the Elder Council, and the head of the table containing the seat of the Hokage, surrounded by the Elder Council. And they all. She was amused to note that this even included Hiashi Hyuga, who was generally considered incapable of such plebeian things as emotions. Were staring at her bug-eyed. The civilian representatives, an obese banker, a hag-like woman with scraggly graying blonde hair who was a shop owner of some repute, and a bald-headed man with a perpetual sneer who was a merchant, were all half standing up, obviously interrupted in the middle of having a shouting match with the other end of the table. Sanada's derisive glance speared through them, and as one they dropped back into their seats, looking pale from the tightly controlled killing intent flowing from her. She scoffed internally, she had never expected anything less from that set of bumbling fools. They would have jumped through hoops for Danzo, even if the plan had not included more revenue for them and a chance to get rid of Naruto. The retired ninja representatives included a gruff grizzled man with a goatee and an eye patch who had been called Ryuikin of the Lightning Fist before he was cut down through his back by an Iwa nin during a skirmish in the Second War leading to his retirement. The other was a genial-looking man with soft features and a visible scar, tracing his jawline and disappearing into his voluminous robes called Shinji, also called the Shinji of the Rainbow Mist, who had been one of the foremost genjutsu users in his heyday. Right now though, both were sitting back in their seats, obviously relaxed and enjoying the entertainment as the surroundings went to hell around them. Sanada could barely stop the snort that came to her as her gaze passed those two, wise they may have been, and old, being only slightly younger than Saratobi-sensei himself, but those two were as uninspired as Nara on their best days. And it was quite apparent that they would be content to merely watch the drama around them without ever actually entering the debate. On the right wing, the clanless ninja representatives consisted of Genma and Raito, highly respected clanless jonin, who had both been part of the Yondaime's guard squad during their Anbu stint. They were both on their feet, having been surprised, she guessed, while they were shouting at Danzo up at the head of the table. They were also bandaged heavily. Sanada smiled thinly at them. That was two members of the council that would back her unquestionably. Next to them were the heads of the Anbu and the Hunter Nin divisions. The Hunter Nin head would support her, she knew for certain. The man was almost fanatic in his duties and considered the position of Hokage his only superior. While that had brought her some headaches earlier, it did work in her favor now. But she was unsure of the Anbu commander. Yuzuki Yugao was a good kunoichi and a loyal one, but she had been suffering through depression since her lover had been killed before the invasion by Suna. Therefore she could very well expect her to side with Danzo on the matter, if only to avenge hate, even though she was sitting passively at the moment with face blanker than the mask attached to her shoulder. Next to them was the stoic Marino Ibiki, the scarred interrogator. He was standing up, palms on the table as stared daggers at Danzo. Coming from him, it was the equivalent of shouting his head off. Sanada grimaced slightly, unnoticed by the crowd gaping at her. She didn't envy Danzo for facing that stare. If nothing else, the head interrogator was quite intimidating. The clan heads were the same motley bunch. The Nara was sleeping, the Akamichi was eating, the Aburama was staring stoically, and the Inyazuka was growling at Danzo. The Yamanaka clan head, Inoichi, was hunched over his steepled hands, analyzing the situation. The Hyuga, who had been caught in the middle of talking down condescendingly, which was his usual tone to Genma and Raito, was caught half standing up, in which position he had frozen when she had entered. He looked unsettled, which, if she was honest, greatly pleased her. A prepared Hyuga Hiashi was a political opponent she would wish only on Danzo, and this man was no friend of Naruto, or herself for that matter. At the head of the table were the familiar faces of the council elders. To the right of the seat reserved for the Hokage was Danzo, just as grizzled, battle-scarred and forbidding as ever. In the instant she had burst in he had looked as off guard as the others. However, an incredibly unsettling smirk was now playing around his lips. In his hand, he was holding an official document bearing the seal of Konoha and the Land of Fire, probably the official declaration of war. On the other side of the Hokage seat were the two elders Homura and Kaharu, perfectly unruffled, aged features turned in her direction. If the two ever displayed enough emotion to label it as such, Sanada thought to herself, they would have been frowning at her. So it seemed that the elders were all in on this silent coup that Danzo seemed to be spearheading. That was a pity, she had held out some hope for the teammates of her late sensei, but if they were willingly squandering their lives, well, as her grandfather used to say, the Hokage's main duty is to protect the tree. If, in the course of doing her duty, she had to go against a pair of her own teachers, then so be it. But for Danzo, whose silver tongue was probably a reason for Sarutobi-sensei's premature aging, there would be no respite. She would expose that bastard somehow, and if she had her way the mummified relic would be executed. A loose cannon like Danzo was too dangerous to keep around, after all. Striding towards the head of the table and ignoring the gazes of the council members, Sanada sat down in her chair nonchalantly before leaning forward and steepling her hands in one of her classic poses. Looking over her hands, she carefully stared at each council member in turn. A disturbing smile on her face and eyes glittering with malice, she looked over the gathering, her eyes pinning the members in place. Even the Nara was awake, staring at her with wide eyes. So, she drawled, her voice echoing in the deathly silent chamber, sounding like a malediction to the jittery council members. A few of them shivered, looking away from her sardonic smile, which only made it grow even wider as she continued. Anybody care to tell me what's going on? Even as the rest of the council subsided under her unnerving stare, Danzo got up, a smarmy smile on his bandaged face. Ah. Our errant Hokage returns. He drawled mockingly, obviously assured of his position. Sanada's eyebrows went up slightly in her surprise as she swiftly altered her plans. It seemed that Danzo seemed confident enough of his effort if he was making such an open move. If she was honest with herself, it unnerved her slightly. She wasn't used to the shadowy root leader moving in the open. She refocused as Danzo continued, the superior smirk on his face already making her want to murder him. She really did not know how Sarutobi-sensei had endured his insolence for so long. I think the council would like to know what led you to abandon your post so soon after you took it, the mocking tone deepening towards the end of his question, Hokage-sama. From the corner of her eyes she saw a few councilmen start to nod before they looked at her and froze, and she sighed slightly. This was not something she was going to be able to misdirect the council away from, damn that mummified relic. She had wanted to get some more time to organize herself before she got interrogated. Drawing herself up, Sanada glared at the smug face of the elder. Remember who you are speaking to, Danzo-san, she said coldly, you seem to have forgotten your position lately. Danzo's smug grin widened. And you are still a fool, Sanada-hime, Danzo responded blandly, before continuing in his usual deliberate drawl. But don't let my views stop you from enlightening us. What exactly was so important that you would abandon your seat to chase after some expendable genin, especially in the state of war we are currently having with Suna? As Sanada opened her mouth to answer, they were interrupted by a low growl by a livid-looking Tsume. How dare you, she sputtered, looking apoplectic with rage, those are our children you called expendable, you slimy bag of filth. Why, I should. That's enough, Tsume-san, Sanada interrupted her quietly, also glaring daggers at Danzo for the callous remark. It's obvious that you can't teach this old war hawk any new tricks. As Tsume subsided, Sanada continued in a flat tone that told everyone that knew her that she was extremely annoyed. And on that note, who authorized a declaration of war on Suna? She looked at the faces gathered around the table, some of which shrunk under her gaze. She noticed, with some disappointment, that the Anbu commander was among them. That was just what she needed, she thought glumly, more work. She liked the kid, she really did, but she didn't want to set a precedent. An Anbu commander was supposed to represent the Hokage's interest and the Hokage's interest only, and allowing an Anbu commander to retain their position after such an obvious misuse of power would set a precedent. Finally, her gaze settled back on Danzo. Shimura Danzo-san, she said quietly, perhaps you have something to say as to how the village I am ruling has declared war on an allied village without me being informed? Her voice growing caustic, she continued, and as far as I can remember, declaring war is the purview of the Hokage and not that of the council? Perhaps you can explain why the council has decided to overstep their bounds. Danzo got to his feet slowly, steadying himself with his ever-present cane as he deliberately made eye contact with each council member, hands cupped over the top of his cane and his serious gaze sweeping over the gathering before they came to rest on a frowning Sanada. Remember, Sanada-hime, If a new Hokage is acting incompetently, he stated gravely, the Elder Council retains the right to suspend the Hokage as long as he or she is still in their first 2 years of office. And you, Sanada Haim, are still very much within the probationary period. Sanada smirked back at Danzo. And do not forget yourself, Danzo-san, that it was my grandfather who wrote those laws. You can only remove me, however temporarily, if Konoha is facing a war, and you have the support of more than 2/3 of the clans and the unanimous support of the clanless representatives. The smirk grew slightly. Until then, Danzo-san, she continued, I am the Hokage of Konohagakure, with all that entails. Sanada could see the smoldering rage in the one visible eye of the crippled elder. Obviously, he had not expected her to be so acquainted with Konoha law so soon. Well, she thought smugly, too bad for him. She had learned Konoha law by heart at her grandfather's knee, and she could recite the Konoha Accord by heart. Though she had to admit, she hadn't thought it would have been so useful when she was learning it. Nevertheless, she continued, facing forward and staring through her fingers at the assembled council. Any declaration of war that has been sent to Suna is to be retracted immediately, with an apology on my behalf. Her bland statement was met with a flurry of muttering between the council. Danzo in particular looked apoplectic with rage. Sanada Haim, he started, his voice a dangerous growl, you have no idea of what you are doing. Stop acting like a petulant child. What you would have done would portray our village as weak and us as weak shinobi who would suffer invasion of our land without retaliation. Taking a deep breath, she tried to center herself before she spoke. They were duped, as were we, by my errant teammate, and we have both suffered equally. To weaken each other serves us no purpose whatsoever, and in our state, even if we overrun their land, we would be far too weak to retain it for any length of time before Iwa invades them, and possibly us. We're holding off their advances barely as it is, would you have us run over? Some of the assembled council seemed to fidget at her portrayal, as if they had never even stopped to think of what would have followed their hasty actions. Sanada sighed to herself. Truly, Konoha had to lose most of this administrative dead weight if it was to function. When her grandfather had created it, his own charisma had held the institution together, preventing any dissension. However, by the time of Saratobi-sensei's second reign, he had been far too old to do an adequate job, and thus Danzo and the elders had subverted it to their own systems, strangulating the system thoroughly. Now, she had the unenviable task of untangling political machinations spanning decades and finding out the duds from the necessary cogs of the system. The sharp rap of wood against wood brought her attention back to Danzo. The wizened shinobi seemed to be controlling his overwhelming rage, with the control granted through decades of politics. As it was, the only tells of his mood were the rather harder than necessary grip on his cane and his lone visible eye narrowing slightly. When he spoke, his voice was a low, even drawl, while his eye was fixed squarely on her face. Surely you must see this, Sanada Haim. Konoha can withstand any assault on itself as we have withstood them for as long as Konoha was standing. Do not insult Konoha. The great tree will stand. Letting Suna invade us, retreat and call us their allies is an insult to everything we have shed our blood for. Will you betray Konoha, Sanada Haim? The utter certainty in the tone, the compelling words, they seemed to capture the audience in a way that no discussion as of yet had succeeded. But while every other ear was turned towards the wizened elder's patriotic rally, Sanada was not concentrating on him at all. For as soon as Danzo started speaking, she had stiffened, as a violent itch had developed in her mind. A second later, a minute seal flared behind her neck, burning her skin as its dull red shine was hidden by her Haori. End of flashback. Huh? What do you mean you had a seal on your neck? Who put it there, Ba-chan? 'Cause if it was that old cripple, I'm coming right back and killing him. Naruto squeezed the small slug in his hands, shaking it back and forth. The main body of Katsuyu was looking somewhat dizzy at the treatment to its clone. Meanwhile, Shizune had edged closer to Naruto, mesmerized by the story. Sanada-sama, you didn't tell me about a seal either. Who put it there? Are you okay? Should I come back? She was interrupted by a quiet snigger. Relax, Shizune. On the contrary, that seal probably saved my life. She giggled somewhat nervously before muttering under her breath, thank the sage for Senju-toka. Naruto stared at the slug clone which was speaking in Sanada's voice. Who's Senju-toka? End of chapter 11. Chapter 12. Hailing Halcyon Days. Shizune cleared her throat nervously. What do you mean, Sanada-sama? Senju-toka was before your time. Naruto looked at the slug in his hands wonderingly, as if he could seat Sanada in the little slug. Before her time? He muttered in surprise before his tight control over his tongue failed. Man, she must be ancient. Ouch. He rubbed his head as an unrepentant Shizuna lowered her hand from when she had bopped him. You're so violent, Shizuna-ni-san. Are you trying to be Ba-chan? Shizuna grinned smugly. Well, Naruto-kun, someone has to keep you in line, and I'm the only one here, so. Naruto mock pouted, hunching over himself. So cruel. Shizuna chuckled indulgently. Enough, Naruto-kun. Turning towards the slug in Naruto's hands, she continued, pulling the conversation back on track. So Tsunade-sama, what was the seal? You know, Senju Toka was an undisputed prodigy in genjutsu in the latter days of the Warring Clans era, Tsunade started her narration. This was a somewhat strange subject to specialize in, even for one of the Senju clan which prided itself on its diversity of talents, because genjutsu, much like Kaiten ninjutsu, was the specialty of their mortal enemies, the Uchiha. However, she soon rose in the ranks, becoming renowned for her skill until she was hailed as being even better than Uchiha genjutsu specialists, who she routinely defeated in border skirmishes that she took part in. Shizuna was nodding her head absently while Naruto listened intently. This sounded like an interesting story. Remember, this was in the time when the Uchiha clan was in the peak of its ascent and the enmity between them and the Senju was on the rise. Headed by the combined leadership of the legendary Uchiha Madara and Uchiha Izuna, the Uchiha were slowly but steadily invading Senju territory. While Hashirama, my grandfather, held off Madara and his brother Tobirama held off Izuna in repeated skirmishes, the leadership of the Senju battalions fell to their second cousin, Senju Toka. All the records from that indicate that she was a capable leader, often gaining crucial victories. But it is agreed in all records that she was. Tsunade paused, shall we say. Unconventional? A snort from the mist surrounding them interrupted Tsunade. Mito emerged from the mist, looking very amused. That's the most restrained opinion of Toka I've ever heard, she sniggered, gracefully slipping into the water between Shizuna and Naruto, dressed in an extremely bright green swimsuit she had procured from somewhere, which looked odd on her translucent body to say the least. Hello, Tsutsu. Settling in the water, she continued. She was arrogant, shunned human contact, and was a perfectionist. She was extremely proud of her chosen art. She giggled. She was also famous for making potential suitors think she had castrated them, you know. Naruto winced, even as Shizuna and Kitsuyu giggled. Tsunade huffed. Thank you grandmother for that extremely relevant information, she said dully. Mito stared back at the slug innocently, her eyes twinkling in mirth. Ignoring Mito, Tsunade continued her tale. So anyway, according to my grandfather, one day one of the Uchiha she had met managed to catch her in a genjutsu, which had almost made her kill her own team and defect to the Uchiha. She did recover at the last moment, but the mission was a failure and her professional pride had been smeared. Yeah, I remember that time, she interrupted, ignoring Tsunade's huff of annoyance. I was in the Senju camp as an ambassador when the frigid Toka herself came to me and begged, Mito emphasized, shaking her head disbelievingly, to help her with a project. I knew it. Tsunade exclaimed, turning towards Mito. I was up all morning trying to decipher the seal. I knew I recognized the Uzumaki designs. Mito blushed. I didn't do much, you know, she protested, she just wanted me to teach her how to detect genjutsu using seals, and I know no other sealing technique to achieve something so finicky, you know. Naruto interrupted them at this point, impatient to know what happened. So what did that seal do? Well, Toka had found that the technique used on her had been an obscure Uchiha genjutsu, utilizing the Sharingan called Kotomatsukami. Tsunade said, continuing the story. It had some pretty hefty prerequisites in order to use it, and it was so rare that Toka probably would never have met another user, seeing as she had killed the one to use it on her as soon as she broke free. However, she was determined to beat the technique, if for nothing else, than to regain her pride. She discovered that Kotomatsukami was in reality not one genjutsu, as she had first thought, but a compound genjutsu. The first component acted like a virus, lacing the subject's thought processes and making them susceptible to hypnotic suggestion. The dangerous part was that this part of the genjutsu felt like the victim's own reasoning due to the first component. Further, the genjutsu was virtually impossible to detect due to it mimicking the flow of chakra in a human closely. She had tried every possible way to detect when it was being cast on her to no avail. In the end, she had to admit that it had stumped her, she couldn't identify the genjutsu being cast on her. Mito smirked, cutting in on the story once more. And of course she couldn't give it up like any sensible person would have done, you know. Oh no, that was not the Senju way. Mito mocked, mimicking a slow deliberate drawl. Naruto could just picture a stately clanswoman speaking to Mito, who was wearing her poker face, and before he could help himself, he was laughing. Mito cracked a small grin, eyes twinkling at him, even as Tsunade grumbled. "You're never going to let me tell my story, are you, Grandma?" Mito waved a hand indulgently. Go on, my cute little granddaughter." Naruto stared at her, nonplussed by her relaxed demeanor. Indeed, he had noticed that Mito seemed considerably less serious compared to when she had been in Konoha. He didn't know if it was getting away from Konoha or coming back to Yuzu, but she was obviously much happier here, and he didn't know why. He would have thought that she would have liked Konoha. Stumped, he decided to focus on the story. It wasn't as if he had any objection anyway. Currently, he being away from Konoha was good for health, both his and Konoha's. Tsunade grunted irritably in reply to Mito's taunt before concluding her story. So anyway, in the end, she managed to create a seal that works to counter the hypnosis genjutsu component found in the signature unbeatable advanced Sharingan genjutsu of the Uchiha, such as the Kodomatsukami, the Tsukuyomi or the Izanami, which all rely on that hypnosis aspect, and each Senju member has the seal tattooed to their neck ever since. Of course we couldn't make it a public technique, or the Uchiha clan would have been up in arms to ban it, so it stayed a Senju hidden jutsu all these years. Naruto frowned at her. But that old mummy is no Uchiha, though he certainly looks the part, the frowning bastard. Why the hell did your seal activate? Tsunade sighed. In case you forgot, Naruto-kun, one of that man's eyes is covered. Flashback. Tsunade stiffened as the skin in the nape of her neck began to burn. Caught off guard, it took her a moment to identify the burning sensation as the activation of a tattooed seal, of which she had acquired dozens, especially as the teammate of an aspiring seal master. Trying to ignore the unidentified and persistent itch in her mind, she tried to focus on remembering which seal she had at the nape of her neck, only to come up empty. As ludicrous as the thought was, she was leaning towards the idea that it was a foreign seal and preparing to channel healing chakra to neutralize the seal when a hazy memory finally came to mind. Of course, the advanced Sharingan hypnosis dispel. But that was not possible. The only Sharingan bearer in the elemental nations right now was Kakashi, and even he had the basic Sharingan. So was the seal malfunctioning? But no, that persistent itch must be the secondary genjutsu, which meant that the primary hypnosis had been there. There were just a few who had reason to hypnotize her at this crucial juncture, and of those, only one had the opportunity, Tsunade thought grimly, subtly eyeing Danzo's bandaged eye socket, which could easily contain a Sharingan with no one being the wiser. Blood was coursing through her veins, beating a frantic tattoo in her head. Never had she been so enraged, even when Orochimaru had tried to recruit her. She remembered something that her grandfather, a renowned pacifist in his time and an ardent supporter of unity with the Uchiha clan, had told her. Remember, Tsutsu, the Uchiha are not our enemy, but our comrades. But also remember this, if that seal on your neck starts burning while speaking with a Sharingan wielder, exterminate the offender with extreme prejudice. For there is one truth that is more precious to protect than even peace, and that is free will. Danzo's visible eye widened in uncomprehending horror, looking on as Tsunade abruptly got up, her hands flying into a seal. Kai. Her roar echoed in the enclosed chamber accompanied by a massive chakra flare, and Danzo slumped in his chair from the backlash of the dispelled genjutsu. The council was erupting into chaos, the civilians cowering as the shinobi were pulling out weapons to defend themselves, and the Anbu detail guarding the door burst in, trying to make sense of the situation. Yugao, pulling her Oni mask onto her face, yelled, "Defend the Hokage." As half a dozen blank-masked assassins dropped from the ceiling, landing between Danzo and the Hokage, swinging their blunt-edged tanto at her. Immediately, the Anbu and the clan heads snapped into action, engaging the intruders. In the midst of the chaos, Danzo slowly stood up, his face grim, holding back a pained grimace. At the moment, no one seemed to suspect him of any wrongdoing, but once his route were cut down, and he had no illusions as to their ability to defeat the clan heads, Tsunade would expose him. Tsunade leapt from her position, smoothly bypassing the clashing shinobi and the utter chaos that permeated the council chamber to land in front of Danzo. Her chakra was spiking, but her face was utterly expressionless and her voice flat and quiet. Nevertheless, all the council members, even the clan heads embroiled in the clash with the mysterious shinobi, heard her declaration. Shimura Danzo, you have been caught in the acts of bloodline theft, illegal experimentation, mind manipulation and assaulting the current Hokage. For these crimes, I, Senju Tsunade, Godame Hokage of Konohagakure in the Land of Fire, declare that you are to be summarily executed. Danzo's lips curled in a mocking sneer, his hands still atop his cane as he stared back at Sonata, looking utterly relaxed. "Do you really think you can touch me, Sonata Heim?" Then two blurs materialized beside Danzo, two hands stretching out simultaneously at his eye level. Danzo's eyes widened, but having been concentrating on Sonata, stood no chance to dodge. Together, unerringly, two strangely silvery kunai embedded deep into Danzo's eye sockets. Sonata, having noticed the blurs and moved to reach Danzo before they did, lurched to a stop in incomprehension. The route that had survived until now jerked to a stop in the middle of the respective battles before they were summarily cut down. And as Danzo toppled, his face locked in an expression between smugness, shock, and horror, two silvery handles inscribed with "The will of fire burns in the Sandame's meticulous hand" were sticking out of his ruined eyes. Above his corpse stood the unexpectedly upright and solemn-looking figures of Homura and Kaheru. No one spoke. Homura was stock still, his hand still in the position in which he had stabbed Danzo, staring down at the blood dribbling down the wooden floors as if in a trance. A lone tear ran down Kaheru's face, splashing onto wizened face of the dead shinobi before she turned away, shoulders slumped and looking older than ever. Still stunned, Sonata cautiously stepped towards her old mentors, a whirlwind of thoughts plaguing her mind. At her footsteps, Kaheru looked up. When Sonata looked into her eyes, she, for once, did not see the shrewd elder who had always been comparing her unfavorably to the other Hokages. Instead, she saw an old woman who had seen too much, felt too much, and done too much to come out of the experience unscathed. Almost involuntarily, she paused as Kaheru managed to somewhat imitate her normal forbidding expression. Somehow stepping closer seemed to be something that should not be done, like interfering in something outside her scope of understanding. Seemingly shaken from his stupor, Homura stepped up to Kaheru quietly and gently placing a hand on her shoulder. When he touched her, all resistance seemed to fail Kaheru as she turned and collapsed onto Homura, burying her head into his chest as all the shinobi. The civilians had from Sonata's killing intent. Looked away awkwardly. Homura's eyes, looking shrewd as always behind his spectacles, speared into Sonata from above Kaheru's shoulder. "Take care of Konoha, Sonata Heim," he whispered, looking into her eyes before his eyes slipped once more onto the corpse in the council floor. He sighed. "We need some time alone, if you would allow it, Hokage-sama," he added, with a formal bow. Sonata stared at him, dumbfounded. Never had she seen the usually unflappable man looking so old. Turning around, he muttered, just loud enough for Sonata to hear. "He might have tried to take away our free will, but he was still our friend." Supporting Kaheru, the frail-looking old man turned towards the great doors of the chamber, pausing at the entrance to look back at her solemnly. "Now, if you will excuse me, I have to arrange a funeral for a shinobi." After a moment, he amended, "If you would allow it, that is, Hokage-sama." Staring at the pair of wizened shinobi, Sonata couldn't find it in her heart to refuse. She gave a solemn nod, and Homura nodded back respectfully before walking out of the chamber, supporting Kaheru. Eventually, the silence was broken by a whistle by Tsume, the clan head of the Inuzuka. "Whew. Who would have thought it of the old fossils?" The Kakachu around Abu Ramashibi seemed to buzz. "Indeed it is unexpected, Tsume-san." "Why?" "Because the elders have always seemed to be more loyal to themselves than to the Hokage. But it is also not unexpected." "Why?" "Because they have always worked to strengthen Konoha, and war with Suna would destroy us. Therefore it is logical." "Oh, for log's sake, stop it with the droning, you're giving me a headache." Tsume growled. Shibi quieted, though the buzzing of his Kakachu betrayed his irritation. Narashikaku grunted irritably. "Troublesome. Hokage-sama, those attackers were assuredly Danzo's root Anbu. That means there probably are more of Danzo's agents in the village." His eyes narrowed. "We also must not rule out the possibility of a dead man's switch scenario, seeing as those root clearly felt their master's death." He was interrupted as the sound of explosions rang through the building, rattling furniture. "Troublesome." End of flashback. When Sonata had finished her tale, an uneasy silence fell upon the gathering. This continued until Naruto, impatiently, asked the question that everyone wanted to know. "Ba-chan, how's the damage to Konoha?" Sonata snorted. "Well, the root were acting in a dead man's switch, but Anbu mobilized before they could hit any of the really sensitive targets. As it was, 23 civilians were injured, none were killed and 53 root nin, all at Chunin level or higher, were killed resisting arrest. We lost 3 Chunin, and there were some property damage from the destruction of their bases, but it seems Danzo wasn't quite as meticulous as he believed himself to be. We found over 20 root trainees in one bunker that hadn't completely collapsed. That makes it two groups of underground shinobi operating inside the village and conducting inhuman experiments. She continued with a sigh. No wonder the other villages call us the village of the monsters. That's not the problem here, you know, Mito interjected calmly. What is the public opinion, and how is Suna going to react? Well, in a stroke of luck, no declaration of war has been sent to Suna officially, so I managed to sweep that hole diplomatically under the rug, so to speak. Controlling Konoha's population, on the other hand, has not been so easy. Mito grimaced. I thought that might be the case, you know. So returning anytime soon is a no-go then? Not a chance. The elders are basically hermits now, the civilian councillors have been sacked, and even the Anbu commander had to be replaced, at least temporarily. Add that to the turmoil over Sensei's death still not being settled. She grimaced. Well, Konoha is very unstable now, and the clan heads and I had to work very hard to get the situation under control. Mito nodded. Whatever else about the man, Danzo always struck me as a person to move a crowd, you know. Sanada laughed hollowly. Tell me about it. That Suna was going to let the Ichibi invade Konoha after that whole debacle with the Kyuubi seems to have won quite a few converts among the ignorant, and there's a rumor going around that Naruto helped him escape after their fight that isn't helping matters at all. Naruto had to grin at that. Well, at least they got something right. Mito, Shizune, and even Katsuyu gaped at him incredulously, which to their annoyance merely seemed to tickle his humor more. What, Databeo? He asked innocently. I knocked him down after dispelling his Bijuu state, gave his sorry arse a little pep talk, and when his brother and sister came to collect him, I told them to simply walk away. What? Are you? Just don't talk anymore, she groaned. Whatever, I suppose you can't help insanity. Naruto merely grinned back. Well, I know I'm awesome, Ba-chan, no need to say it. Sanada scoffed. More like retarded. She muttered under her breath. I heard that, you old hag. Shut up, brat, before I shut you up myself. You can try, you wrinkly old. Enough. Reflexively, both Naruto turned to see who had shouted, only to face Shizune who looked displeased to say the least. Taking a deep breath to calm herself, she fixed a hard stare on both of them. Just for a little time, she ground out, can you two act like adults? She started it. He started it. Stop copying me, you old hag. Stop copying me, you brat. Shut up. Both of you. Both Sanada and Naruto paused mid-expletive before slowly turning to face Shizune, who looked, if possible, even more pissed than before. Naruto gulped. Valiantly trying to ignore her anger, Shizune started speaking in a tightly controlled, even tone. Sanada-sama, how did you cover up Naruto-kun's disappearance, and what did you say to Shikamaru-san and the others? Sanada spoke hesitantly, studiously not looking Shizune in the face. He's earned training leave and has been taken to one of the Senju clan hideouts for convalescence from your last fight. Naruto's smirk grew wider. So does that mean I'm getting paid, Databeo? Not a chance, brat. Be thankful I'm not charging the damages from this mayhem to you. Sanada shot back before cowering as Shizune glared at her. After all, she was not in her own body. An angry Shizune who was large enough to crush you between her hands was not a comforting thing to see. Nope. It wasn't cowardice at all, it was prudence. Prudence. Naruto started to giggle at Sanada's reaction before Shizune's gimlet eye was turned on him. He turned away, shivering. Man, Shizune-san was scary. The next day found him up before the crack of dawn, trying to regain his form. According to Shizune, the deterioration of tissue that he had suffered due to the use of large amounts of Kyuubi chakra had been exacerbated by the final jutsu that he had used, which had siphoned his life force in order to seal Sasuke. Therefore he had to condition his body from the beginning, which was, in his opinion, a pain. To exacerbate the issue, the use of life force without proper channeling had caused his own chakra coils to get clogged with his life force, making it unable for him to use any chakra, even if he was allowed. The only consolation was that the events of the past days had conveniently given him a get-out-of-Konoha free card. Now, stuck in the ruins of his homeland for an unspecified time, he could finally concentrate on the training that he had been fretting over for quite some time. Not to mention the fact that he had two dedicated sensei to help him, especially in the Fuinjutsu field, which he felt he was lagging behind terribly. Panting as he stumbled to a stop from his morning run, Naruto flopped limply onto the cool dewy grass in the grasslands of Uzoshiogakure. From where he was lying, he could spot Shizune in the distance picking herbs for the stomach-churning concoctions she made Naruto drink after every meal. This was in addition to the hour-long therapy sessions where she would use that strange tingly green medical chakra technique on him. In spite of the fact that her proximity usually meant some sort of disgusting medicine these days, and the fact that Naruto had discovered that she had the same uncanny ability as Iruka had of making you feel absolutely guilty for not obeying their orders, looking at Shizune still brought a smile to his lips. There certainly was more to that Kunoichi than met the eye. He analyzed that last thought before his brain stuttered to a stop and he blushed brightly, taking another surreptitious glance at the med nin. Considering their first meeting in Yuzu, maybe he shouldn't have worded it that way. Naruto-kun. The yell made him turn away from his staring to see Mito strolling in his direction before she gracefully dropped to the grass beside him. She turned towards him, a gentle smile on her face. "How's the rehabilitation coming along?" Naruto lay back on the cool grass, letting it cool down his body as he absently chewed a grass blade. "As well as can be hoped, I suppose," he said, shrugging. "I'm not yet at 100%, that's for sure." He plucked another blade of grass absently. "Any progress on my little chakra problem, ghost lady?" Mito merely shook her head, slightly. Frowning, Naruto turned his head to observe the spectral form of his ancestor face to face. He tilted his head inquisitively. "Then what are you doing here, ghost lady? I thought you were checking up on the hidden Fuinjutsu archives in the ritual chamber?" Mito waved a well-manicured hand dismissively from where she was laying down, looking the picture of tranquility. "Meh. I got bored of poring over those dusty scrolls. Besides, needling you is much more entertaining, you know. It's good to know I am such a source of hilarity to you, ghost lady," Naruto stated dryly. "Oh, you're welcome, Naruto-kun. So, why were you staring at Shizune-san when I came? You've usually got much better environmental awareness." Her eyes twinkled mischievously, and Naruto noticed with a hint of dread that she was developing a slight smirk. "You wouldn't happen to be succumbing to your pubescent lustful urges, would you?" "What?" Naruto sputtered, sitting up abruptly as he choked on the grass blade. He was staring at her with wild eyes. "What the hell, ghost lady? Are you trying to get me killed? I don't know about you, but an angry Shizune-san scares me more than you do." Mito smirked triumphantly, continuing smoothly. "Not that there is anything wrong with it, of course. The earlier you rebuild the Uzumaki clan the better, I always say." Naruto, who had just managed to unclog his windpipe, immediately choked on the grass blade again, hacking and coughing as he looked at Mito in horror. Mito, looking supremely unconcerned, added, "And don't think I didn't notice that you didn't deny it, Naruto-kun," completely ignoring Naruto's rapidly paling face and violent shushing motions. Just as Naruto was about to whisper something back, he froze as another voice drifted past him. "He isn't what, Mito-sama?" Face bloodless, Naruto slowly turned around to see that Shizune was right behind him, a basket of herbs in her hand. Shakily pinning a smile onto his face, he greeted Shizune weakly. Hello, Shizune-san?" He threw an urgent glare at Mito. "It's nothing. Nothing happened at all, right, ghost lady?" Shizune, bewildered, turned to Mito, who merely giggled demurely in reply. Sighing in annoyance, Shizune turned towards Naruto, who had been inching away from her, and grabbed him by the arm. "Where do you think you're going, Naruto-kun?" She tilted her head, smiling sweetly, and Naruto shuddered. "I swear I wasn't peeking at you, Shizune-san." "What are you talking about, Naruto-kun?" Shizune asked, looking back at him bemusedly. "You didn't forget that your medical checkup is now, did you?" "No, I didn't forget. I didn't remember." Naruto stuttered incoherently before turning anguished eyes towards Mito. "Ghost lady, save me from the evil medic." Shizune suddenly stopped dragging his by his arm to turn towards him with a sickly sweet smile. "What did you call me, Naruto-kun?" Nothing at all." Shizune smiled cheerfully before resuming her march to their quarters, dragging a reluctant Naruto behind her. "I thought so. And Naruto-kun." Shizune added in a sickly sweet tone that had Naruto cringing. "What, Shizune-san?" Shizune turned towards him, still holding him by the wrist. "If I ever catch you peeping on me, I will castrate you. Understand?" Naruto nodded fearfully, crying anime tears as Shizune resumed dragging him to do the medical checkup. Man, why did this sort of thing always happen to him? He wasn't a pervert. Before Naruto even noticed it, a week had passed on the island. Naruto had fallen into a repetitive routine. Every morning Naruto would get up before the sun rose, doing warm-ups and jogging around the large island until his muscles, still not completely recovered, burned with fatigue. After breakfast, he would usually join Mito in either learning the basics of Fuinjutsu or go to Shizune who would help him in academics or strategy. This would be followed by one of Shizuna's medical therapy sessions, after which Naruto would explore the ruins of Uzoshiogakure, on the lookout for any secret caches or anything that might be of any value that had survived the original invasion and the effects of time and weather. In the evening, Naruto would resume his training, which due to him still being forbidden from accessing chakra in any significant amount, meant more Fuinjutsu training, though the evening sessions were more a pretext for Mito to study his Jinchuriki seal, as she was apparently fascinated by its metamorphosis during the Shinigami incident, as he had come to call it. After the sessions, which often lasted until after dusk, the three would have an early dinner, crowded around the campfire with Tsunada's slug summon, which she used to relay the information of the outside world, and go to sleep early, warmed by the dormant volcano at the doorstep of the village. Currently, Naruto was in one of his scavenging trips, searching a small household that seemed to have been abandoned and thoroughly sacked by the invading army. It was a desolate scene. Broken ornaments lay flung to the ground and forgotten, and the salty sea breeze had got into many of the buildings, their protective wards already having been broken in the invasion. However, much to the relief of the group, there were no dead bodies to be found on the island. This was, as Mito had explained, because of the island's automated organic waste disposal system. The Uzumaki, like most other shinobi, were extremely pragmatic with their bodily remains, often destroying them utterly to prevent their use in some of the more disturbing jutsu in the world. The Uzumaki were even more alive to the possibility than the others, seeing as many Fuinjutsu could be powered by the organic remnants of a person. So the dead bodies, both of the conquering army and of the clansmen, had been automatically disposed deep underground as soon as they were a few days old, and it wasn't as if any of the invaders had escaped with their life. According to Mito, one of the last Uzumaki survivors had, seeing as the battle was lost, initiated a suicidal jutsu that sucked all the life force out of all the inhabitants of the island and used it to power a set of wards surrounding the island. Even Naruto had winced at that. Having your life force forcibly extracted was excruciating, as he knew well from personal experience. Searching through the effects of the dead inhabitants had proved less than satisfactory. There were surprisingly few technique scrolls lying around, which proved quite irritating to him, especially since Mito refused to let him open the huge technique library scroll that she carried with her until he was, to quote her, completely recovered of his impulsive behavior. Naruto personally thought her a hypocrite. It wasn't as if she had been the model of restraint, gaping at the seals of that stupid barrel in the middle of a battle. However, seeing as she had the solid backing of Tsunada and Shizune, it meant that he was stuck studying Fuinjutsu, which was extremely draining to study, or discussing strategy for the foreseeable future if he didn't get any instruction of his own. It didn't help that none of the jutsu he had could be described as discrete by any stretch of the imagination, thus negating the idea of practicing the jutsu he knew on his own. Entering yet another house, he came upon what had become a very common sight in his scavenging, an ornate sword lying on the ground. This one was an adachi. The thin, long blade, half drawn from the sheath, shone like burnished silver, contemptuously ignoring the salty breeze that should have rusted the blade long ago. But this was no ordinary sword, Naruto mused, as he knelt near the sword and carefully slid the blade fully inside the sheath. He had to withhold a wince as he did so, even if just for relocation. The Uzumaki heart blades did not like being handled by someone not their rightful wielder. The Uzumaki heart blades were unique to each user. Crafted by every Uzumaki before their promotion to shinobi, the construction of their own heart blade was a coming-of-age ritual as old as the clan itself. These blades were used by its wielder for as long as they live, and every single blade had its own specialties and their own quirks, a result of the overwhelming number of seal arrays on the weapons, each of which were traditionally designed by the wielder on their own, other than the one seal that gave them partial sentience. Though they were called blades, Naruto had found they were not necessarily bladed weapons. One of the heart blades he had found had been an enormous bow staff. What truly made these weapons special was that all of these weapons contained a portion of the very essence of the Uzumaki clansman that made it, imbued in a special sealing ceremony. Naruto was looking forward to the day he made his own soul blade. That would be when he would, according to the clan's traditions, be considered an adult and, in Naruto's case, the clan head. However, it would be some time in the future, for his Fuinjutsu was, according to Mito, barely passable as the scribbling of a toddler on a sugar rush currently. It wasn't his fault that he was self-taught. Holding the blade between his outstretched hands for a moment, he said a small prayer for the departed clansman before carefully stowing it in a pouch over his shoulder, which already contained several other weapons of various kinds. In the evening he would give these to Mito, who would store them with the countless others they had discovered during their stay, to be collectively taken to the memorial shrine. That was one of the strange quirks of the Uzumaki clan, as Naruto had found out. While other clans did not maintain any memorial of dead clan members other than of the most illustrious members, the Uzumaki had the tradition of collecting the heart blades of their fallen clansmen and depositing them at a large shrine built at the other side of the volcano. This surprisingly made sense, as the blade contained within them a shade of its owner, meaning that some form of them was present in their blade. Sometime later, after they had finished a scouring of the land for all the Uzumaki heart blades, Mito and he were planning to visit the shrine and deposit the blades in their rightful place. When Mito had retrieved her own heart blade from the Senju clan home where it had been kept, she had also retrieved Kushina's, a blood-red katana with gold engravings, to deposit in the shrine, along with all the Uzumaki clansmen that had died in the invasion. Naruto hadn't yet looked at it. He had a feeling that it would bring back a lot of feelings he had long buried deep in his subconscious. Well, that was in the future. For now, thoughts of forming his own heart blade had to take a backseat for other pursuits, such as improving his physical condition, which had definitely deteriorated, and regaining control over his chakra. Because he had tried to access his chakra. But to his incredible frustration, his chakra was proving to be most uncooperative, somehow acting more fluid than he was used to. And it was doubly frustrating because either as a consequence of Sasuke being sealed inside him. And didn't that make him nauseous? Or the sealing itself, his chakra capacity, already well into monstrous levels, had doubled, making him lose the tiny fragment of control he had managed to claw onto in his Genin. His fists clenched as he strode through the ruined streets of Uzushio. He had to regain his edge. He had to. The world was not going to wait for him to be ready, as Danzo had proved. He would be Hokage, and he would bring back the awe that the name of the Uzumaki clan had once inspired. And he did not have time to waste. This is… a stability glyph? Naruto guessed wildly, staring at an arcane character that was stubbornly refusing to reveal its secret. Mito, sitting on the other side of the low table, glared frostily. Are you asking me, or are you telling me? Naruto groaned to himself. Telling you? He ventured uncertainly, only to have a scroll smack his head. What was that for? Mito smiled predatorily. That, she said with obvious satisfaction, was for not concentrating. Look at the seal again, and this time, look at it carefully. Rubbing his head, Naruto resumed poring over the sealing character. That curling line looked incredibly familiar, as did that crossed line, and that sweeping line that encircled the right half of the character. Hey! Naruto exclaimed indignantly, looking at a calm Mito. That's just unfair, Ghost Lady. This is two characters swished together. Mito calmly folded her hands in her lap, looking at Naruto as he fumed. Took you long enough to notice, Naruto-kun. Remember, Fuinjutsu is an art that requires you to use your mind. Why do you think I've been pushing you to study analytic thinking? Naruto shrunk into himself. Sorry, Ghost Lady. Mito sighed. Look here, Naruto-kun, she said gently, reaching across the table to touch his cheek and tilting his head to stare into his eyes. I know you're frustrated, but you have to give your body time to recover. But Naruto tried to interrupt. No buts, Naruto-kun. Mito said firmly. You pushed yourself far more than you yourself realized that fight. It was never supposed to go that way. I was supposed to switch out for you if you were too hard pressed, you know. But since I got myself knocked out, here a small note of bitterness entered her tone, that didn't happen. I know you want to get stronger, Naruto-kun, she continued, gently caressing his cheek. But remember, your life is not just your own now, you know. She gestured absently with her free hand. You are now responsible for the continuation of this entire clan, you know. Naruto nodded slowly, staring at Mito with some surprise. It wasn't often that the stately woman showed her softer side, and Naruto had learned to cherish every moment. Laying her other hand on his shoulder, Mito leaned towards him. So Naruto-kun, be patient. It's good to be eager, but you won't help anybody but your enemies if you burn yourself out. For a moment, they stared at each other. Then Mito smiled cheerfully, gracefully rising to her feet and turning around. Well, that's enough sappy stuff for one day, isn't it? Now come on, let's do something a bit more interesting. Naruto quirked an eyebrow. You mean I can? No. Mito said flatly. Naruto slumped, pouting. Mito smirked. So you don't want to start learning how to make explosive tags? I'm learning how to make explosive tags? Naruto perked up, looking at Mito with glittery eyes. Mito smirked. But you said you don't want to? Nah, Ghost Lady, don't be mean. Hey, where are you going? Ghost Lady, wait up. Naruto, stop twitching. Shizuna sat up, looking faintly annoyed. On the futon in front of her, Naruto sulked. But it tickles, Shizune-san. Shizune frowned at him. And you're a ninja. Try to control your body a little. From the other side of the bed, Mito snickered. Now, Shizune-san. She said, eyes twinkling in mirth. Surely you can't expect a growing boy like Naruto-kun to control his body when you lean over him. Shizune squeaked, removing her glowing hands from Naruto's torso, as if she had been scalded as she looked at Mito, scandalized. Mito-sama. Naruto pouted at Shizune. What she said, Nisan. When you do that, it just feels strange. Naruto-kun. Shizune squeaked, while Mito giggled helplessly. Nana, ghost lady, why are you laughing? A dry voice interrupted them. Why Shizune, you never told me you went for the younger ones. The now familiar form of Kutsuyu appeared next to the futon, Tsunada's voice issuing from it. What are you talking about, Databeo? Naruto's voice rose loudly in the suddenly quiet room before Mito dissolved into helpless giggles again, even as Shizune was blushing bright red. Tsunada-sama. Tsunada snickered. Why Shizune, if I knew you were so easy to tease, I would have started ages ago. Mito, recovering from her giggling fit, looked at the Kutsuyu clone curiously. So Tsutsu, why are you here now? We didn't expect you until tonight. It took Tsunada a few moments to compose herself from her giggling fit. Finally stopping her giggling, she choked out, right. Just give me a second, it's hard to explain from here, before the slug went unnaturally still. Naruto turned around to stare at the slug clone Tsunada had been using to speak, though he had got used at this point to hearing Tsunada's voice issuing from a giant slug. You got used to it pretty fast when there was a giant slug at the head of the table at dinner. It was nevertheless odd to talk to one when it replied in the voice of the Hokage. Somehow, it detracted from the awe factor, though he supposed it probably was stranger from Tsunada's point of view. From what he had observed, the clone was effectively taken over by Tsunada during the long distance, and he didn't want to imagine what it felt like to be limbless. An odd squelching noise brought Naruto out of his temporary reverie, only for him to wish he hadn't, as a perfectly manicured hand reached out of the mouth of the slug clone, apparently searching around blindly for a handhold. Involuntarily, Naruto leaned backwards in his futon, trying to put as much distance as possible between the slug regurgitating a human and himself. Seriously, what was it with the Sannin and Yuki techniques? For all it knew, it might be actually pleasant. Though he somehow doubted that very much. But their respective techniques looked way too much like the summon swallowing the summoner for his comfort. The toads were good in a fight, and Gamakichi was even a friend, albeit in the moronic brother who keeps getting into scrapes kind of way. But there was no way he was going near any of their mouths, they ate raw insects, for log's sake. During the time he had spent debating the why nots of summon-based travel, Tsunada had fully extricated herself from the grasp of the slug, which promptly unsummoned itself. She was shaking her hair loose as she took great gulps of air in apparent enjoyment. In Naruto's opinion, she looked far too dry for someone who had just been inside a slug. She also looked inordinately pleased with herself. "Whew," she murmured, apparently to herself before she turned to face them proper, a bright smile on her face. "Thank the log. I thought I was going to shrivel to death inside that stuffy office. Hello grandmother, Shizune, brat," she continued, briskly greeted each of them in turn as she stepped towards the futon on which Naruto lay. Leaning over him, she activated a diagnostic jutsu absently as Mito peeked over her shoulder. "Tsutsu, what are you doing here?" Tsunada looked up. "Oh right," she said, smiling sheepishly. "I just wanted to get away from paperwork." Tsunada stopped speaking, mechanically turning towards Shizune, who had gone rigid. "Tsunada-sama. I wanted to check up on Naruto. That was what I was going to say." Tsunada stammered, panicking. "I am doing all the paperwork, Shizune. Why would you even think otherwise?" "Maybe because I know you," Shizune muttered, shooting her a thoroughly unimpressed glare before she relented under Tsunada's pathetic pleading face. "We'll see, Tsunada-sama," she said grudgingly. Tsunada laughed nervously. "Of course, Shizune." Naruto shook his head at the scene, a wide grin on his face. "Ba-chan, you're hopeless." Tsunada glared at him. "Shut up, brat." He didn't shy away from that scowl. He didn't. "When we get back, I'm going to make you do the work," she muttered sulkily, "then we'll see how you like it." "Hey, bring it on, Ba-chan. I can do all of your stupid paperwork in no time, I'm not old like you." Belatedly, Naruto noticed a vein pulsing on Tsunada's brow. Oh hell, now she was mad, he could see her hands curling into fists. Well, time to get the hell out of Dodge and change the subject. And totally ignore it if his voice came out an octave higher than usual. "So, bah." Naruto paused as Tsunada's menacing grin rapidly reached a snarl and hurriedly backpedaled. Tsunada-sama." Sanada grinned most unpleasantly. Victorious grins did not suit her, Naruto thought to himself. They made her look way too scary for comfort. Why oh why did he find himself around so many violent women? Why did you come here? Sanada didn't answer immediately, instead staring contemplatively at her jutsu. I managed to borrow the Nara's medical encyclopedia on a hunch. They had a method to stimulate recovery in chakra coils. It should, theoretically, unclog the chakra coils of the life force tainting it. Any side effects, Sanada-sama? Shizune asked curiously, looking at the process from where she was, as usual, on the right side of Sanada and behind her. Naruto couldn't help but notice that she seemed to slip into the background whenever Sanada was around, even though she was usually very personable. Sanada grunted in reply to her question. No, but he will need continuous medicine for the coming month. Other than that, after the procedure is complete he should be good to train. Naruto could literally feel himself perk up at that news. He had had way too much time getting sidelined due to his inability, and he was getting antsy. It didn't help that he had so much to learn, and for the first time in his life, teachers willing to teach him unreservedly. However helpful and understanding Iruka had been, he had always refused to teach him anything not covered by him in class. Crowing in joy, he grabbed onto Tsunada's hand urgently. So when can we do it, Ba-chan? Tsunada chuckled. Yes, we can do it today, brat. Naruto got up off the futon as Tsunada's diagnostic jutsu flickered out, almost vibrating in place in his impatience. Well, what are we waiting for, Ba-chan? Let's go. The Uzumaki ritual chamber was quiet, as was befitting the momentous occasion that was currently taking place inside it. After all, this was the first time in Mito's memory that non-Uzumaki were conducting a sealing ritual inside the most sacred of the Uzumaki structures. Usually, even if the spokes were displayed to allies, the main chamber was completely off-limits to non-Uzumaki. And the sealing, even of a medical nature, to be conducted on the Uzumaki clan heir by outsiders. That, Mito thought as she overlooked the process from outside the chamber, was the ultimate expression of what the ravages of time and war had done to a once proud clan. She had wanted to take part in the ritual, in fact, she had insisted, until Tsunada had shown her the schematics of the seal that was proposed. It had been crude, for the lack of a better term, but it would do the job. However, unfortunately, the seal's design by nature completely negated any chance of her taking part in it. For one, the seal absorbed a pulse of the sealer's own life force to kickstart the process. It wouldn't be much, barely an hour's worth, but as a chakra construct she had none at all. In addition, it required a steady flow of chakra from the sealer to the seal, which would merely stress both her and Naruto, and probably cause the seal to implode if she took part, seeing as her chakra was, itself being siphoned from Naruto via the vampire seal. So in the end, she had grudgingly accepted being delegated to being a mere observer in the proceedings, and she was finding that it did not really agree with her. The giant seal etched on the floor of the sealing chamber was giving off an ethereal reddish glow, pulsing slightly. From where they were sitting opposite each other in the corners of the chamber, two feminine figures locked their hands in an unusual seal simultaneously, their right hands forming a half-ram, and their left hands clenched with the forefinger and middle finger outstretched, touching the giant sealing matrix. Shizune, now. Both the figures were shrouded in a miasma of chakra. Soon, a wave of color washed over the seal, acid green and sky blue, racing inwards from their corners to meet in the epicenter of the seal, where a figure, seemingly unconscious, lay. When the waves of color crashed into the figure, for a moment the figure arched, red, green and blue flames of ethereal chakra surrounding him, a kaleidoscope of color as the waves of green and blue crashed into the figure, insistently trying to overcome the last resistance of the red. Something had to give. After a moment that lasted a lifetime, the final barrier of red cracked, and Naruto's eyes snapped open as he started to scream. On the opposite ends of the seal, Tsunada and Shizune slumped in place. Mito was grabbing the railing so tightly that the wood, strengthened by countless strengthening seals, was beginning to crack under the strain. In the chamber the seal dimmed from the outside inwards, the very ink breaking into light particles and floating into nothingness. And Naruto continued to scream hoarsely, back arching in agony as light seemed to pour into him from the seal. The deterioration finally reached the center of the seal and imploded with a final sputter of light. Naruto fell limply to the ground, shivering. For a moment there was an expectant silence, everyone watching the crumpled figure expectantly. The silence was shattered by the sound of a low, breathless laugh. Gradually growing in volume, soon Naruto's maniacal laughter was echoing throughout the chamber as he lay flat on his back. Ah ha 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 ha. None of the others made to move, unable to understand what was happening. Then, a multitude of glowing golden chakra protrusions burst out of Naruto's back, passing through the floor without harming it in the least and cocooning him. But they were not all chains, each of the individual chakra expressions was unique. Sanada could see a glowing chain, what looked like a series of glowing kanji, a translucent dragon and even a silhouette of a snake, only seen by the distortion of the air around it. Mito gasped at the sight. It was impossible, utterly impossible. Getting up, she hurriedly walked to the chamber. If that was what she thought it was. Naruto held up one hand, blue chakra coalescing around it to condense into a perfect sphere of swirling chakra. The Rasengan. From the base upwards, each one of the structures surrounding him seemed to collapse upon itself, reforming into the familiar form of the golden chains. And Naruto finally opened his eyes as a tired smirk formed on his lips. "I'm back." Mito poked her head into the chamber timidly as Tsunade and Shizune got onto their feet, panting heavily. "Naruto-kun, are you alright?" Mito asked, somewhat hesitantly. Naruto turned towards her, a wide grin on her face, and gave her a thumbs up. "Never better, Ghost Lady," he said, his voice still somewhat hoarse from the screaming. Then he seemed to notice the chains around him, for he frowned. "Ah, wait a second, Ghost Lady, I'll just eat." As soon as Naruto cut the flow of chakra to the chain, he trailed off mid-talk as he collapsed like a puppet with its strings cut. "Naruto-kun." Tsunade and Mito reached him at the same time, and Mito fretted over him as Tsunade ran a diagnostic jutsu tiredly. Finally, Tsunade's jutsu flickered out as she got back to her feet, hefting Naruto over her shoulder in a fireman's carry. "It's all right, just chakra exhaustion." Mito breathed a sigh of relief. Tsunade gave her a commiserating look. "Don't be relieved now," she half-joked. "When he gets up and realizes he can do jutsu, he's not going to stop pestering you." Mito smiled gently, helping up Shizune, who looked close to passing out. She reached out with one hand to ruffle the blood-red locks of the unconscious Uzumaki, her eyes softening. "It's all right. The Uzumaki will do well with him, I know." End of chapter 12.